The candle had barely burned when the wax had already left its mark on cold skin. Beside the bed, 2 knives were still stained with blood. In a small apartment in Las Vegas, the body of Herline Dulai lay motionless after a night of so-called purification rituals. For those who knew Herline, a passionate fitness trainer, a warm and inspiring woman, her death was not only brutal, but also hauntingly unbelievable. Having come to Las Vegas to start her life over, Herline embarked on a journey to find spiritual balance, but the place she hoped to find enlightenment turned into a pit of tragedy, and the person who accompanied her on that journey, Ash Armand, a former star of the show Gigolos, was the one who dragged her into a spiral of death. Herline Dulai was born in 1991 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She grew up in a close-knit family, surrounded by supportive parents and siblings. Naturally outgoing and warm, she easily connected with people. Friends and colleagues admired her for her empathy, encouragement, and ability to inspire positivity in others. From childhood, Herline was curious and eager to explore many interests, but her deepest passion was science and health. She pursued biology in college, envisioning a career in medicine or research. Yet, after graduating, she realized that life behind a desk or in a lab was not the future she wanted. That realization pushed her to make a bold change, relocating to Las Vegas, a city known for its energy, opportunity, and relentless pace. For Herline, Vegas was more than just a move. It was a reinvention. Shortly after arriving, she immersed herself in fitness. Within months, she had transformed not only her body, but also her confidence. That personal journey sparked a calling. She became a certified personal trainer, determined to help others unlock their potential. Her career flourished quickly. Clients valued her encouragement, guidance, and unwavering support. To them, she wasn't just designing workouts. She was a motivator, a confidante, and a partner in transformation. Colleagues admired her energy, her optimism, and her unique ability to find common ground with anyone she met. But beneath the bright surface, Herline wrestled with deeper questions. After the move, she often pondered life's purpose, searching for meaning beyond her daily routines. This led her to explore spiritual practices and alternative healing. She became fascinated by meditation, energy work, philosophical ideas about inner balance, and higher states of awareness. The more she delved into these realms, the more drawn she became to the notion of transcending ordinary reality. Through this new path, she found herself in a different social circle. Among those she met was a man who shared her hunger for deeper knowledge. Their conversations revolved around spirituality, energy, and uncovering hidden truths. At first, the exchanges felt inspiring, but over time, they began to take a darker turn. Ash Armand, birth name is Akshaya Kubiak, had a magnetic charisma. Confident and articulate, he could adapt to any conversation, making those around him feel seen and understood, always the center of attention. He projected the aura of someone who had glimpsed higher truths. He often spoke about consciousness, energy, and existence, eager to share his beliefs with anyone willing to listen. Herline was captivated by his worldview. She felt that he understood her yearning and that with him, she might unlock something greater. Their talks quickly evolved into a deeper connection. Together, they explored practices meant to quiet the mind, dismantle inner barriers, and reject social constraints they believed held them back. In time, however, his ideas grew more radical. He argued that traditional self-improvement was shallow, claiming that true enlightenment required abandoning fear, breaking mental chains, and venturing into altered states of perception. He insisted that real awareness lay beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience. That was when their retreats began. They ventured to remote spots outside the city, places where they could disconnect from the outside world. There, Herline experimented with new methods of self-discovery. Gradually, these practices took a more dangerous turn. Psychoactive substances entered the picture, presented as keys to higher consciousness, tools to break free from ordinary reality. Under their influence, she slipped into altered states, convinced she was glimpsing profound truths. Each experience felt like a journey into deeper understanding, yet the line between clarity and illusion grew thinner. Perception became unstable, reality uncertain. These journeys were intoxicating, but they slowly pulled her further away from the life she once knew. At some point, her search for harmony shifted into something far more perilous. She may not have realized how far she had drifted, but step by step, she was being drawn into a world she could not easily escape. By then, the path back to the life she had built seemed impossibly out of reach. Herline and Ash grew close quickly, their bond intensifying in a way that felt almost fated. In the early days, their connection seemed effortless, filled with conversations about spirituality, self-discovery, and the search for higher meaning. Yet as time passed, small cracks began to appear, warning signs that at first seemed too minor to matter. Ash could be affectionate and attentive, speaking with warmth and insight, but then, without warning, he would grow cold and unapproachable. His moods shifted like quicksilver. Sometimes he spoke with dazzling conviction, as if unveiling the universe's deepest secrets. At other times, he snapped at the smallest things, retreating into silence for hours, even days. There were occasions when he vanished altogether, ignoring Herline's calls and messages, only to resurface, claiming he had needed time alone to cleanse his spirit and release the energies he had absorbed from others. Herline wanted to understand him, but these erratic disappearances left her increasingly uneasy. The more time they spent together, the more Ash pressed her to abandon the beliefs and frameworks she had once relied on. He claimed logic was a trap, that true growth could only be achieved by silencing reason and embracing pure intuition. His words grew steadily stranger. He spoke of shadowy forces, of people infected with dark energy that held humanity back from evolution. Most troubling of all was his fixation on Herline herself. He insisted there was something inside her that needed to be purged, an imbalance in her energy field that blocked her from achieving enlightenment. According to him, she could only reach her full potential if she trusted him completely and allowed him to guide the process of cleansing. By the summer of 2020, his behavior had become increasingly erratic. Some days, he claimed to see visions of her future or to read her private thoughts with ease. Other days, he was consumed by suspicion, demanding that she trust only him and no one else. At times, he was an inspiring mentor, radiating confidence, while at other times, he was volatile, irritable, and withdrawn. What unsettled Herline most, however, was his growing obsession with rituals. He described ancient ceremonies that, he said, had the power to strip away all inner barriers. Only by participating in these rituals, he insisted, could a person truly free themselves from illusions and embrace reality. At first, Herline dismissed this as another one of his philosophical digressions, but soon, the pressure mounted. He began urging her to take part, telling her that only absolute trust in him could allow her to transcend her limits. Gradually, she realized these conversations were no longer abstract. His strange beliefs weren't confined to talk, they had begun to shape his every action, and by extension, their relationship. He demanded not just her attention, but her obedience. He expected her to surrender completely, body, mind, and spirit. to his methods and his worldview. On the evening of July 15, 2020, Herleen was with Ash at his apartment in Las Vegas. That night was supposed to be dedicated to what he called a spiritual cleansing session. He told her the time had finally come to cast aside all boundaries, to achieve the higher state of consciousness they had long spoken of. To prepare, he insisted that she take a powerful dose of psychoactive substances only under their influence. He claimed, could she achieve true clarity and connection with the hidden dimensions of existence? Herleen hesitated. A wave of unease swept over her. Every instinct told her to refuse, but Ash's pressure was relentless. Against her better judgment, she gave in. This was not the first time she had experimented under his guidance, but there was something different about this night. The dose was larger, more dangerous, more extreme. Within minutes, the effects overtook her. The world began to unravel. Objects blurred and dissolved into shifting shapes. Sounds grew distorted, vibrating with unnatural intensity. Her perception collapsed into chaos as the drug surged through her body. Ash, by contrast, seemed exhilarated. His words tumbled out in a frantic, rapid stream. He declared that his mind had broken free of its limits, that he could see beyond the physical world into some higher plane of truth. His eyes burned with a manic light, his voice rising with fevered intensity. But for Herleen, the experience was terrifying. Her visions did not bring peace or understanding. They brought panic. Anxiety gripped her chest. Her body trembled, and her mind spun into a vortex of fear. She tried desperately to ground herself, to fight her way back to stability. But her body would not obey. The night that began as a promise of enlightenment was descending into something darker, something from which there would be no return. Ash's behavior grew more unstable with each passing hour. At one point, he turned to Herleen with a piercing gaze, his voice low but edged with menace. He said he sensed something unnatural about her, insisting that she was engulfed in dark energy that needed to be cleansed. When she tried to object, his agitation only escalated. He accused her of resisting, of blocking the release of negative energy. His words tumbled out faster, sharper, more threatening. With every sentence, his obsession deepened, and the atmosphere in the room thickened with dread. Herleen attempted to calm him, but his mind was no longer reachable. The stimulant had clouded his judgment, and he was consumed by the belief that he needed to act immediately. In a sudden burst of aggression, Ash seized her wrist. She tried to pull away, but his grip, fueled by adrenaline and frenzy, was overpowering. With a violent shove, he sent her crashing to the floor. The assault escalated with terrifying speed. Violence seemed to surge through him in waves. Grabbing a heavy glass candlestick from a nearby table, he struck her again and again. Her head dropped limp, her body trembling in convulsions. Yet he didn't stop. In a horrifying frenzy, he reached for knives and other objects, inflicting savage wounds. Only when Herleen's breathing ceased, when the spark of life had completely left her body, did the rampage end. A chilling silence fell over the Las Vegas apartment. Ash stood frozen, his stimulant-fueled mania slowly giving way to a grim awareness of what had just unfolded. Blood was everywhere. On the floor, on his clothes, staining his hands. The stench of death was thick in the air. For hours he lingered in that apartment, pacing, staring at her body, as if searching for a way to undo what had already been done. But there was no undoing it. On the morning of July 16, 2020, a call was made to emergency services. The man on the line, Ash Armand, spoke with an uneven tone. There was tension in his voice, but not the panic one would expect from someone who had just witnessed a tragedy. He told the dispatcher that his partner was dead, claiming it had been an accident and that he had tried to help her. But it was too late. Police arrived within minutes. Ash himself answered the door. His appearance stunned them. His clothes were stained with blood, his expression weary, detached. He showed no visible signs of panic or despair, only a cold exhaustion. Inside, the scene was one of chaos and violence. On the floor lay the lifeless body of Herline Dulai, her skin pale, her face and neck marred by dark bruises. Her arms bore deep scratches, surrounded by smears of dried blood. The disarray of the room left little doubt. A brutal struggle had taken place, but the bathroom told a different story. It was eerily clean, almost scrubbed. Investigators noticed faint smudges of blood on the tiles, but most surfaces had been wiped. In the washing machine, they discovered clothing stained with blood. Ash's own outfit appeared to have been recently laundered, suggesting a hurried attempt to conceal evidence. 2 unlit candles stood by the bed. Disturbingly, investigators found traces of melted wax on Herline's skin, an inexplicable and chilling detail. On the bedside table lay 2 knives, one a kitchen blade, the other a folding knife, both still caked with dried blood. It is clear that someone tried to erase the truth but failed. Officers also uncovered a suitcase packed with personal items, cash, and documents. The discovery suggested Ash had intended to flee, but had either changed his mind or run out of time. When questioned, his statements were erratic and contradictory. At times, he claimed he remembered nothing. Moments later, he insisted Herline had attacked him first and that he was only defending himself. However, his body had no scratches or injuries. Nothing to corroborate the story of his struggle. The police kept a close eye on Ash's behavior. He showed no visible emotion, asked for no help, and never expressed genuine shock at what had taken place. Meanwhile, forensic experts continued combing through the crime scene. In the refrigerator, they discovered several bottles of alcohol. On the table, they found traces of a powdery substance, later confirmed to be a banned substance. Step by step, the picture began to form. Someone had clearly tried to destroy evidence, but the attempt was careless and incomplete. Everything pointed to the crime having been committed under the influence of psychoactive substances. While investigators documented the evidence, Ash was placed in the back of a patrol car. He didn't resist or protest. The investigation was still in its early stages, yet authorities already had little doubt. His version of events, centered on self-defense, simply didn't stand up to scrutiny. Detectives immediately began to dig into Ash Armand's past. The inquiry soon uncovered striking details of his biography. Ash's real name was Akshaya Kubiak. He was born in 1981 in India and spent his early years moving between Japan and the United States. From a young age, his parents introduced him to meditation, alternative medicine, and spiritual practices. As a teenager, he immersed himself in Eastern philosophy, became fascinated with esoteric teachings, trained in massage and energy healing techniques. The turning point in his life came in 2011, when he caught the attention of Gareth James, the owner of a luxury escort agency. Ash's striking looks and confident demeanor made him a natural fit for the world of high-end companionship. This led him to Las Vegas, where he was quickly swept into a lifestyle of wealthy clients, lavish parties, and easy money. By 2012, he was invited to join the reality TV show Gigolos, which gave him both national exposure and financial success. But with fame came pressure, the constant public attention, rivalry among castmates, and the demands of the escort industry began to weigh heavily on him. To maintain his image as a desirable, larger-than-life figure, Ash turned to steroids to enhance his physique. Eventually, he escalated to harder substances. His dependence on external validation soon mixed with a growing addiction to banned substance. As the years went by, his behavior grew increasingly unstable. He was involved in bar fights, had several altercations in Las Vegas nightclubs, and was arrested for driving under the influence. When Gigolos ended in 2016, his popularity faded rapidly. Income streams dried up, and his attempts to stay relevant in the media world failed. The fortune he had made during his years of fame was quickly squandered on luxury cars, wild parties, and an indulgent lifestyle. By 2020, his life was a shadow of what it once was. Once a recognized TV personality, he was now renting a modest apartment and scraping together income by meeting fans of the show who were willing to pay for his company. When he met Herline Dulai, he was already spiraling. In his desperation, he turned once more to spiritual practices and mysticism, convincing himself that he had the ability to manipulate energy and bend reality. But under the grip of banned substance, these ideas twisted into dangerous delusions. His relationship with Herline became less about love and more about control. To him, she was not only a partner, but someone he could dominate and mold. Over time, his conviction hardened into obsession. He believed he could not only influence her thoughts, but dictate her destiny. That July night, with his mind corroded by years of substance abuse and self-deception, the fragile balance finally shattered. Investigators assembled the puzzle of his life piece by piece, and the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. This was no random crime. Ash had been on a collision course with tragedy for years. His trial began in 2021. Prosecutors charged Ash Armand with murder, arguing that Herline Dulai was the victim of a savage, deliberate attack, and that self-defense was incompatible with the evidence. The defense, in turn, leaned on claims of temporary insanity. Ash's lawyers argued that he had lost control of his actions due to banned substance and an emotional breakdown, insisting that he never intended to kill her. In court, Ash himself maintained that he loved Herline and would never have deliberately harmed her. Public reaction was sharply divided. Many, upon learning the disturbing details of the case, condemned the sheer brutality of the crime and demanded the harshest punishment possible. Yet, a portion of Ash's fans from the Gigolos reality show continued to stand by him. They insisted he was a victim of circumstance rather than a cold-blooded killer. Supporters voiced their opinions on social media, and some even organized fundraising groups to help finance his legal defense. Herline's family, meanwhile, fought relentlessly for justice. Her parents and sisters gave emotional interviews describing her as a vibrant, compassionate woman whose life had been stolen by a man who exploited her trust. They emphasized that no argument, whether about banned substance, stress, or mental health, could erase the cruelty of his actions or diminish his responsibility. In December 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Ash Armand was found guilty of the voluntary manslaughter of Herline Dulai and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Under state law, he would be eligible for parole after serving 8 years. For Herline's loved ones, the ruling was bittersweet. They expressed deep disappointment, calling the punishment far too lenient given the horror of the crime. The court, however, had considered the defense's arguments regarding Ash's impaired mental state at the time of the killing, and this factor influenced the final sentence. According to the judgment, Ash will remain incarcerated until 2041, although he could potentially be released as early as 2029 if granted parole. Whether or not parole will ever be approved remains uncertain, a question that continues to haunt Herline's family. Christopher Moyer was born on May 21, 1967, into a middle-class family. He valued independence and believed that education was the key to achieving it. Although he didn't have many friends, this didn't bother him much. as he spent most of his free time studying. After finishing school, he attended college, where he developed a strong interest in computers and technology. His dream was to become self-employed after earning his degree. Beyond his career goals, he also dreamed of starting a family. By 2010, Christopher was 44 years old and had realized his aspirations. He was self-employed, working as his own boss, and happily married. He lived in a spacious house in Pennsylvania with his wife and son. He worked as a freelance computer specialist, assembling custom computers for clients from his home. His wife, Irina Moya, was skilled in electronics and assisted him with his work. She was born on August 12, 1971, which made her 39 years old in 2010. Irina was originally from Ukraine and had moved to the United States in search of a better life. She met Christopher in April 2002 during a challenging time in his life. He was going through a difficult divorce from his first wife, with whom he had no children. This experience left Christopher longing for a large, loving family. Irina also shares this dream and hopes to build a new life in the United States. Their relationship developed quickly, and later that same year, they decided to get married. They began planning for their future, which included moving out of Christopher's bachelor home to a place more suitable for a family. Before they could find a new home, Irina discovered she was pregnant. In 2003, they purchased a large, cozy house in a quiet suburb of Orrington. The area was peaceful, scenic, and much safer than the bustling city where Christopher had previously lived. Although the local residents formed a close-knit community, the Moyas were more reserved, choosing to keep to themselves. Over the years, neighbors described them as withdrawn and rarely seen in the neighborhood. While they didn't socialize or attend local gatherings, they weren't entirely disconnected. For example, Christopher once arranged for shared use of a snowblower with his neighbors. However, in most cases, the family preferred solving problems independently. On September 25, 2003, Irina gave birth to their first and only child, Dylan Moya. By 2010, Dylan was 7 years old and thriving in school. Having successfully completed the first grade, he was a bright, intelligent child, and his parents were incredibly proud of him. Teachers, both from his kindergarten and primary school, regularly praised Dylan for his abilities. Much of his success stemmed from the active involvement of both his parents in his education. Being highly educated themselves, Christopher and Irina prioritized their son's learning and supported him every step of the way. While they avoided participating in the neighborhood's social life, they always attended school meetings together, demonstrating their dedication to helping Dylan succeed in both academics and life. Christopher was known as a calm, grounded individual, and his wife, Irina, shared many of his qualities. Both were thoughtful and quiet, preferring action over conversation. Their closest neighbor, Rose Radziul, knew them better than anyone else in the area. Although they were on friendly terms, Rose described Christopher and Irina as reserved, meek, and silent. Their interactions with her rarely extended beyond simple greetings and polite exchanges. Notably, Rose noticed that Christopher had a tendency to be controlling and domineering towards Irina. She noticed that Irina seemed to become more withdrawn when she was with Christopher, often avoiding communication so as not to upset him. Their son, Dylan, however, was different. Teachers regarded him as an exceptionally bright and curious boy. By kindergarten, he had a vocabulary beyond his years and often impressed or puzzled adults with his questions. Dylan's primary school teacher was particularly fond of him, recognizing his great potential early on. Instead of playing typical games for children his age, Dylan showed an interest in scientific literature, often reading during his free time. Like his parents, he was not highly social, but he maintained good relationships with his peers. Irina was described as a loving and devoted mother who prioritized her son's well-being and development. Despite her shy and unsociable personality, Christopher, similarly, was regarded as a caring father, deeply invested in Dylan's well-being. According to relatives, the family had created a warm and nurturing home environment, rooted in love for each other and their child. A few months before the tragedy, the family had even taken a trip to Disneyland, making the events of June 17, 2011 all the more shocking. At 9:40 p.m. on that fateful Friday, 44-year-old Christopher called emergency services. He calmly confessed to killing his wife and son with a baseball bat, stating that both were dead and refusing to offer any first aid. His cold and detached tone during the call was unsettling, as if he were discussing something mundane. He gave a detailed account of the crime, describing how he had killed Irina by beating her to death before attacking their son Dylan. He even supplied his personal information and the family's home address, thanked the dispatcher, and hung up. Emergency responders rushed to the Moyer family home, where they encountered a chilling scene. When no one answered the door, authorities initially suspected Christopher had barricaded himself inside and might be armed. A note taped outside listed the names and contact details of relatives, suggesting that Christopher had prepared for what was to come. Neighbors began to gather, watching the tense situation unfold. The police believed Christopher might resist arrest, but then someone noticed one of the family's cars was missing. This raised the possibility that Christopher had fled. By 2 a.m., officers entered the home through an open garage door. They proceeded cautiously, weapons drawn, but found no one alive inside. Instead, they were met with a gruesome scene. On the second floor, they discovered two bodies, 7-year-old Dylan and 39-year-old Irina. Both had suffered severe head trauma from a blunt object, their skulls brutally disfigured. Irina's body was found in the bathroom adjacent to the main bedroom. Bloodstains and drag marks suggested that her body had been moved there after the attack. A towel was also placed over her face, a gruesome detail that added to the haunting scene. Christopher, however, was nowhere to be found. Dylan's room was nearby. He was found in his bedroom with injuries similar to those of Irina. A bloody baseball bat, believed to be the murder weapon, was lying next to his body. The bat was sent to a lab for analysis, as the caller on the emergency line had predicted. The police activity quickly attracted the attention of the neighbors, especially Rose, who was close to the family. When Rose goes to find out what is going on, she is horrified by the brutal attack on the Moyer family, and is even more shocked when she hears Christopher confess over the phone that he killed his own family. The police immediately questioned Rose, hoping she might have heard or seen something since she was at home during the time of the murders. However, Rose stated that she hadn't heard any screams or disturbances, only the sound of a car engine leaving the Moyer residence, which she assumed was Christopher fleeing the scene. She also noted that she hadn't noticed anything unusual or any warning signs of such a violent event. Rose shared detailed information about the family, with the police being particularly interested in Christopher, who was missing. They needed to determine the direction he might have gone in and whether he had taken a weapon with him, as one neighbor had suggested. Christopher had reportedly told the emergency dispatcher that he planned to wait for the police to arrive. Yet, for reasons unknown, he was gone by the time officers reached the crime scene. Rose described Christopher as calm and introverted, adding that she couldn't imagine him committing such an atrocity. She noted that, although he wasn't very affectionate towards his wife, they seemed happy in public, and she had never seen him argue with his wife or scold his son. Forensic experts and detectives thoroughly combed the crime scene, working to piece together what had transpired. No signs of a break-in were discovered, and all the available evidence pointed to Christopher's responsibility for the attack. Fearing that his mental state had deteriorated and that he might harm someone else, authorities launched an urgent manhunt. Despite this, Christopher's actions didn't fit the profile of a typical serial killer or maniac. 2 hours after police arrived at the house, they were still searching intensively for Christopher. They tried reaching him on his mobile phone, but he didn't respond to any calls. During the investigation, security footage from a nearby camera captured Christopher's car, narrowing down the potential routes he could have taken. Road services and patrol units were alerted and stationed at strategic points in an effort to intercept him. Yet Christopher seemed to have vanished. At 12:56 a.m., a witness from a neighboring town called Hadborough rang the police. The caller, a train engineer, reported finding a body on the railway tracks. Tragically, the man on the tracks matched Christopher's description. According to the engineer, the train was unable to stop in time to avoid hitting the man. Authorities arrived at the scene and found a body, later identified as Christopher, through documents found in his possession. His pocket contained $300 in cash and car keys. A dark Toyota Camry, registered to Christopher, was located near the railroad crossing. The police concluded that Christopher had deliberately ended his life shortly after the murders. He appeared to have been familiar with the train's schedule and intentionally positioned himself on the tracks to coincide with the arrival of an oncoming train. As a result, the entire Moyer family died, leaving many unanswered questions about this horrific incident. Irina's parents, along with her brother and sister-in-law, were in a neighboring town when the news broke. The police contacted them to inform them of the deaths of Irina, Dylan, and Christopher. During questioning, the family revealed that the Moyers had planned to visit them that weekend. According to their plans, Christopher, Irina, and Dylan were supposed to drive over on Saturday night. After the visit, Dylan was meant to stay with his grandparents for a few days, while his parents spent time alone together, with the grandparents later returning Dylan home. The tragic events, however, unfolded just days before this planned visit. Shortly before the tragic events, Irina's parents tried to call her, but their calls went unanswered. They were not overly concerned, assuming the family had gone to bed early to prepare for their long journey. Relatives of theirs stated that they had spoken with the Moyers on Friday morning, when both Irina and Christopher seemed cheerful and did not mention any issues. They were busy making final preparations for their trip. Neither Irina nor Christopher had a history of mental health problems, which made the tragic events even more shocking. Christopher's parents were also informed of the tragedy. His father reported speaking with him on the same day and noted nothing unusual or alarming. Christopher had mentioned extending a contract with a major client, which made him optimistic about his upcoming weekend plans and improving his financial situation. Their family had been dealing with financial struggles recently due to the instability of freelance work. Christopher had expressed concerns about potentially losing their home, but the issue appeared to have been resolved. It seemed he was simply worried that such financial difficulties could return. When friends and family were questioned, none could provide a motive for the tragedy. Christopher, described as a loving husband and father, seemed incapable of such violence. What could have driven him to kill his entire family and take his own life? Their family was private, rarely sharing details of their personal lives. The medical examiner's office conducted autopsies on Irina and Dylan. Both were found to have died from multiple blunt force head injuries inflicted with extreme force and determination. However, these findings provided no insight into why Christopher, a man with no history of depression or violent tendencies, would commit such a horrific act. Family members described Irina as loyal to her husband, leading a quiet life with minimal social interactions beyond her neighbors and her child's teachers. Their relationship was considered healthy and loving. Christopher was seen as a hard-working man who provided for his family and never displayed depressive behaviors or violent tendency. Adding to the mystery, Christopher left no suicide note to shed light on what led to this devastating act. Key documents found in the house revealed crucial details. Investigators discovered that the family was at risk of losing their $450,000 home. Christopher had received a foreclosure notice just days before the tragedy, and they lacked the funds to resolve their financial troubles. This crushing reality may have driven Christopher to despair. It is believed that he had planned to harm himself, but in his state of anguish and loss of reason, he could not bear to leave his wife and children to face poverty and hardship. He may have convinced himself that killing his family was a way to shield them from future suffering. Despite this theory, the exact motive remains uncertain. Detectives carefully examined all evidence and consulted psychiatric experts on such behavior. Typically, such actions are linked to underlying mental health problems. However, Christopher had no diagnosed mental health illnesses and exhibited no signs of significant struggles beforehand. Relatives shared that Christopher had been deeply stressed by financial issues. Their family had previously faced the threat of losing their home in 2006, but succeeded in overcoming the challenge. The family lived modestly, but this time, the situation appeared dire and irreparable. There was no evidence to suggest that Christopher had been struggling with severe mental health issues or that he had planned the tragedy long in advance. Experts instead believe the decision may have been impulsive, driven by the overwhelming tension that Christopher had quietly been battling on his own. Christopher's father was aware that his son would never seek help from a psychiatrist, no matter how severe the situation became. There had been a suspicion that Christopher might have used illegal substances, but this was proven false. Toxicological tests confirmed that his blood was clean. However, this detail provided another clue: Christopher was not taking any prescribed medication, indicating that he had avoided seeking medical help for his anxiety or other possible issues. The forensic investigation continued, uncovering troubling evidence. The blood found on a baseball bat near Dylan's body was identified as belonging to both Dylan and Irina. Fingerprints on the other end of the stick showed it was Christopher's. Besides, footprints and additional evidence from the family home allowed investigators to piece together the tragic sequence of events. The Friday morning when the tragedy unfolded had seemed normal, but Christopher had likely already made his decision. A trip was planned for the following day, and his wife and son went to bed early that evening. Christopher, however, stayed awake, unable to sleep. At some point, he retrieved a baseball bat from the garage and waited for his family to fall into a deep sleep. He did not want to make noise or raise suspicion. Christopher's actions suggested that he wanted to carry out his plans swiftly, though calling it humane would be a stretch. He first entered the bedroom he shared with his wife and attacked her suddenly. The first blow to her head caused fatal injuries, leaving her unable to scream or resist. Christopher proceeded to strike her multiple times, breaking her skull. He likely believed that ensuring her death quickly was necessary. Irina succumbed to internal bleeding within minutes, and forensic evidence showed that she had no defensive wounds, indicating she had been caught completely off guard. Next, Christopher turned to his son, Dylan, who was asleep in his room. He killed him in the same manner, with the boy unaware of what was happening. Afterward, Christopher dragged his wife's body to the bathroom adjacent to their bedroom, leaving a blood trail behind. The reason for this act remains unknown. Additionally, he covered her face with a towel, a gesture often associated with remorseful killers who cannot bear to look at the consequences of their actions. After the murders, Christopher did not immediately call emergency services. Instead, he wrote a note listing the contact information of family members, presumably to assist authorities in reaching them. He also sent a text message to his father, apologizing. At the time, his father had no idea what had occurred and did not understand the gravity of the message. The violent events were entirely unexpected and shocking, even to those closest to Christopher. After bidding farewell to his family and leaving behind clues, Christopher called 911 to confess his actions. However, he did not wait for the police to arrive. He needed to act quickly to position himself at a reachable section of the train tracks before it was too late. This urgency may explain why he left no explanation for his actions in his note. He also chose not to leave a will, possibly because the family possessed very few valuables. Only 2 cars remained. Their most valuable property had already been lost, and they had no savings. A key document found in the house provided critical insight into the double murder. It revealed that the family had been struggling with financial problems for an extended period. Christopher's freelance work was insufficient to support a family of 3. Years earlier, he had faced the risk of losing their home for the first time. Thankfully, they managed to make the necessary payments in 2006 and kept their house. However, their financial situation deteriorated further in 2010. By September of that year, debts were mounting once again. Family members and neighbors suspected that the financial troubles were linked to money and real estate. Unfortunately, Christopher had kept his struggles private and did not ask for help, so no one realized how severe their situation had become, not even his relatives. Psychiatric experts concluded that Christopher decided to kill his family when he realized they were unable to escape their financial difficulties. In his distorted reasoning, he believed that taking their lives was the only way to spare them from a life of poverty. His disturbed state of mind led him to view this act as a twisted form of mercy. After the investigation was concluded, the case was closed. Irina and Dylan Moyer were buried together in Pennsylvania, near a city nearby. There is less information available about Christopher's funeral, but it is known that he was buried separately, far from his wife and child. Irina's family insisted on this, as they believed it was unfair to bury the murderer with Irina and Dylan. Leslie Perlow, a 21-year-old woman, worked at the law library in the Palo Alto courthouse in California and lived there with her family. She led a normal life and was studying at Stanford University at the time of a tragic incident in 1973. With ambition and determination, she focused on developing her career before thinking about settling down and starting a family. On Tuesday, February 13th, 1973, Leslie was last seen leaving work around 3 p.m. When she did not return home, her family initially assumed she might have gone for her usual walk around the Stanford campus, but as time passed and she still hadn't appeared, they began to worry. After contacting friends and colleagues, but no one had any information about her, the family organized a search. When their efforts led nowhere, they reported her missing to the police, who took the situation seriously and began investigating. 2 days later, on February 15th, officers discovered Leslie's body in bushes near the university campus. She had been strangled with her scarf and showed clear signs of a brutal attack, including bruises covering her body. Evidence revealed that she had been abused, and her underwear and pantyhose were stuffed into her throat. She was partially undressed, and blood stained her clothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, and further evidence, nail clippings and bodily fluids, indicated she had fought back fiercely. At the time, forensic technology, such as DNA profiling, was not advanced, and there were no criminal databases near where the body was found. Police found Leslie's orange Chevrolet Nova abandoned near an old, deserted building. Her shoes were still in the car, but no significant evidence was gathered from the car or the scene. Despite efforts to identify suspects, none of Leslie's friends, family, or colleagues could provide clues. Leslie, described by everyone as calm and unassuming, made the murder a huge shock to all who knew her. The investigation quickly stalled after all potential suspects close to Leslie were ruled out through verified alibis. After 5 days, law enforcement turned to the public for help, releasing details about her car and its isolated parking location, hoping for witnesses. Police received several tips through phone calls, though none led to viable leads. A month later, authorities discovered the body of a young man named Mark Roswell, who had died just half a kilometer from where Leslie was found. Mark has ties to the court where Leslie works, is currently on probation for distributing illegal substances. Investigators looked into the possibility of a connection between Leslie and Mark, suspecting that Mark's case may have been motivated by guilt. However, interviews with courthouse staff confirmed there was no known relationship between the two. Family and friends of both Leslie and Mark were unable to establish any link. After thoroughly investigating Mark's background, detectives found no evidence suggesting a history of violent crime. His only prior offense was dealing banned substances. Ultimately, Mark was ruled out as a suspect. Despite significant efforts, Leslie's case remained unsolved. During this time, a new lead surfaced when a police officer contacted the station. Although he had been off duty on the night Leslie was killed, he had seen her car by chance while driving home through a secluded area. According to his report, on Tuesday, February 13th, he noticed an orange Chevrolet parked near an abandoned building. The sight caught his attention because the location was usually deserted. Alongside the Chevrolet, he saw a gray car and a young man with long blonde hair standing between the two vehicles. Leaning over as if speaking to someone, he observed the situation for a while, but did not notice anything overtly suspicious, so he continued on his way. While his account provided some useful information, he unfortunately didn't recall the license plate of the gray car. Based on certain evidence, detectives began to suspect that Leslie might have been the victim of not just a violent crime, but also a serial killer. Their suspicions were reinforced by the fact that several serial killers were active in the state during the early 1970s. The media immediately picked up on this theory, and over the years, speculations arose that Leslie might have been a victim of infamous killers like the Zodiac or Herbert Mullin, both of whom were responsible for multiple murders in the region. Even Ted Bundy was considered a suspect, as he was attending school in San Francisco during this period and lived near Stanford. Another theory attributed her death to a cult known as the Angels of Death, whose victims were found in San Francisco. However, as the investigation struggled to gain traction, detectives explored every lead. Over time, prominent suspects such as Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, and others were cleared of involvement. A year after Leslie's tragic death, another devastating incident shook the community. On Sunday, March 24, 1974, 21-year-old Janet Taylor was preparing for a busy day of work and visiting friends. Her car had broken down the day before and was in the repair shop, so her father gave her a ride to work. After finishing her shift, Janet planned to stop by her friend Deborah's house. Janet was a young woman full of ambition. She had recently turned 21 and was the daughter of a well-known university coach. She worked hard as a university student and dreamed of a successful career. That evening, after spending time with Deborah, Janet realized around 7 p.m. that she urgently needed to return home to let the dogs out for a walk. Wanting to avoid inconveniencing anyone, she refused to call her father or accept Deborah's help. Instead, she decided to hitchhike to her home in La Honda, a short distance away in an area surrounded by nature reserves near Stanford. Confident in her decision, Janet believed there was no reason to worry, and Deborah didn't perceive any danger either, a mistake that would prove to be fatal. The next morning, Janet's boyfriend noticed that she hadn't returned home. Alarmed, he contacted her friends and family to try to determine what had happened, but no one had seen her. Later that same morning, a milk delivery driver traveling near Stanford noticed something suspicious on the side of the road. When he stopped to investigate, he made a horrifying discovery. It was the body of a young woman. When the police arrived, they identified the victim as Janet Taylor. She had been strangled with her own sweater. Although she was clothed, her shoes were missing. Oddly, her feet were clean, despite the heavy rain the night before. While her body was damp, the ground underneath was dry, suggesting she had been placed there after her death. Janet's clothes were torn, and, like Leslie's, her underwear and stockings had been forcibly shoved into her throat. Investigators confirmed that she had been abused before being killed and subjected to prolonged beatings. Some of her belongings were missing initially, but were later found scattered along the roadside. Her clothes had been discarded over a stretch of approximately 500 meters on both sides of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had deliberately disposed of them while driving. Janet's body was discovered just 2 kilometers away from the location where Leslie's body had been found the previous year. Not only did both women share a striking similarity in appearance, but the perpetrator also used similar methods in both crimes. These resemblances strongly suggested that the 2 women had fallen victim to the same serial killer. The shocking connection alarmed the community, heightening concern as the realization of a potential serial murderer set in. Rumors quickly spread that a maniac was active in the area, leaving residents feeling unsafe. People criticized the police for failing to stop the violent crime wave gripping the city. One curious detail united the victims: they were all found barefoot, with their shoes discovered far from their bodies. The victims, all young women, were similarly dressed in raincoats, a coincidence likely explained by the weather. However, the absence of their bags appeared deliberate. It was confirmed that Leslie and Janet had carried bags, but these were never recovered. Some speculated that the killer kept the items as trophies, a behavior often associated with serial offenders. Once the similarities in the cases were identified, the two police departments began collaborating. Shortly after Janet's murder, Peter Thompson was attacked in a seemingly unrelated incident on March 30th, 1974 in California. At 4:20 am, a passing motorist discovered Peter, bloody and injured, near his parked car by the roadside. The motorist called for help, and police arrived to investigate. In the back seat of Peter's car, they found broken beer bottles, which appeared to have been used to cut his face. Peter explained to detectives that he had picked up a hitchhiker who attacked him after provoking a conflict. Meanwhile, forensic experts searched the area around Peter's car and the spot where the hitchhiker was allegedly picked up. Nearby, they discovered an open beer pack matching the broken bottles found in Peter's car. At the same time, a deputy sheriff reported seeing a suspicious man with long blonde hair who ran away upon noticing the officer. Unfortunately, the man evaded capture. It is noteworthy that a person with similar characteristics was also seen near the scene of Leslie's murder. Detectives questioned Peter further, during which something unsettling emerged when asked for his contact information. Peter provided the details of a woman named Barbara Rocky, claiming he had met her before. Investigators soon learned, however, that Barbara had been murdered 2 weeks earlier, on March 11, 1974, in Utah, near the Grand Canyon. Barbara, a 22-year-old college student, had been killed after voluntarily going with her attacker. She was abused and then shot 5 times in the back with her own Magnum .357 pistol. Chillingly, her killer had carefully folded her clothes beside her body, suggesting an emotional attachment to her. Barbara's death raised further questions. Detectives discovered that she was acquainted with Janet Taylor, one of the other victims, a connection that appeared too coincidental to ignore. Peter's claim of knowing Barbara came under intense scrutiny, especially since he appeared confused during questioning and delayed his responses, as though crafting a story. However, the investigation ultimately revealed no evidence linking Peter to the murders. He had no motive, and it was confirmed that he was not in Utah at the time of Barbara's death. His account of the hitchhiker attack remained plausible, with no conclusive evidence to prove or disprove it. Nevertheless, investigators continued exploring possible connections between Barbara and the other victims, interviewing those close to her. This effort led them to Gerald Hicker, a former university classmate of Barbara's with a documented history of violence against women. Further investigation revealed that Gerald was responsible for Barbara's murder. Despite this breakthrough, no evidence linked Gerald to the murders of Leslie or Janet, even though Barbara's case bore similarities to the others. Ultimately, Gerald was charged only in Barbara's death, leaving the murders of Leslie and Janet unsolved. In March 1975, a year after Janet's disappearance, the investigation into her case took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reported that San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies had searched a rental room based on a tip from an anonymous source. The room had been rented by a long-term tenant who had moved out a few weeks earlier. The tenant was reportedly behaving suspiciously, and during the search, police discovered photographs of a woman resembling Janet Taylor, along with a newspaper article about her murder. The young man who had occupied the room was quickly located. However, he remained calm and claimed to have been a close friend of Janet. Witnesses confirmed their friendship, and his possession of the photographs and the newspaper clipping was deemed innocent memorabilia. As a result, he was not arrested. In July 1975, the San Mateo newspaper published another story, reporting that investigators working on Barbara's murder were exploring possible links to Janet's case and had uncovered new leads. Though no specific suspect was mentioned, a police officer stated that progress had been made and an arrest was expected soon. At that time, it seemed as if investigators were once again considering Peter Thompson's involvement. Janet and Barbara were acquaintances who were killed within 2 weeks of each other. Peter Thompson, a mutual friend, died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their deaths. Witnesses reported seeing a long-haired hitchhiker who matched Peter's description, driving a car associated with Leslie's disappearance. However, Peter was eventually ruled out as a suspect. After his death, the investigation stalled, and there were no significant developments for decades. The case remained dormant until 2008, when true crime enthusiasts speculated whether Ted Bundy could have been involved in the Stanford killings. Investigators explored this possibility, but found no evidence connecting Ted to the crimes. By that point, law enforcement had determined with confidence that Barbara's murder was unrelated to the murders of Janet and Leslie. Despite these conclusions, murders continued to occur in the Stanford area, and new victims occasionally emerged. For instance, in October 1974, Alice Perry was found murdered. Like the others, there were no immediate suspects. Authorities believed a serial killer might be targeting victims around Stanford, further complicating efforts to solve the original cases. These investigations extended well into the 1980s. When Ted Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death in Florida, he began confessing to unsolved murders, eventually admitting to 23 killings across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. However, no documented murders were tied to Leslie and Janet. Investigators made several attempts to link him to the Stanford murders, but all efforts failed. He was executed in 1989, by which time authorities had definitively ruled him out as a suspect in the murders of Janet and Leslie through DNA evidence. These cases remained unsolved for decades, with frustration further muddling the investigation. For example, serial killer Herbert Mullin, who confessed to murdering 13 victims, killed his last victim on the same day Leslie disappeared, just a few kilometers from where her body was later found. Similarly, Ted Bundy had reportedly been in the Stanford area at the time of Leslie's murder, and her appearance matched his victim profile. However, DNA evidence eventually excluded him as a suspect. For many detectives, coincidences are rarely dismissed, but in this case, the overlapping incidents only clouded the investigation and delayed progress. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large. The cases saw no breakthroughs until 2016, when investigators reopened several cold cases. They revisited the murders of Leslie and Janet, this time utilizing innovative genetic genealogy techniques developed by Parabon Nanolabs. Law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the abuse and suspected killer at the very beginning, and all samples were sent for genealogical analysis. This seemed promising because the company's innovative techniques had already solved several cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. After completing the genealogical analysis, detectives received the results. Using the DNA profile, they created a family tree, and by 2018, the police identified a possible suspect. However, they couldn't confront him directly. Instead, detectives began discreetly monitoring 74-year-old John Guthrie. One day, during surveillance, John and his wife visited a coffee shop. After drinking his coffee, John discarded his cup in the trash. Detectives quickly retrieved the cup and sent it for testing. The DNA sample from the cup matched 100% with the traces found on the bodies of Leslie Perloff and Janet Taylor. In 2018, John was living with his wife in Hayward, California. He was arrested for the murders committed in 1973. 45 years after the crimes, investigators discovered that John, a medical technician at Stanford Hospital at the time, had no known connection to the victims. During the initial investigation, John had already attracted suspicion due to his criminal history. His record showed a pattern of incidents of an abusive nature, with his criminal behavior beginning in his youth. For instance, on June 8, 1963, when he was 18, John offered to walk 15-year-old Margaret Williams home after a dance near the military base where she lived with her family in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. Margaret never made it home. When Margaret missed her curfew, her family immediately alerted the police. Within 2 hours, her body was found. Witnesses helped authorities identify John as the perpetrator. He had taken Margaret to a baseball field, assaulted her, abused her, and killed her by striking her on the head. Found guilty, John faced a maximum sentence of 10 years under the laws at the time. Ultimately, he served 6 years in a juvenile prison and was released early in 1969 under the condition that he leave Germany. He returned to the United States, secured a job at a hospital, and married his colleague Susan, who had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship. For 8 years, John appeared to be a decent family man. However, during this time, he abused his stepdaughter Katie, threatening to kill her mother if she reported him. Katie later described him as a monster. In 1977, Susan caught John abusing her daughter Katie. They divorced, but for reasons unknown, Susan did not report the abuse to the police. A few months later, John married Linda Caputa, with whom he remained married for 24 years until her death in 2002. They had 2 children, and John appeared to be a loving and responsible father. For years, John's children and others believed the allegations against him were false, unaware that he had killed Leslie in 1973 and Janet in 1974. In 1975, however, John was involved in another crime that finally drew law enforcement's attention. He was charged with abusing a 17-year-old girl in Santa Clara County while serving as a leader of a youth scout organization. He pled guilty as part of a plea bargain and received a lenient sentence, 6 months in prison and a small fine. This crime demonstrated that he was prone to abusing and strangling his victims, but authorities still did not connect him to Leslie and Janet's murders. At one point, John was even considered a suspect. A San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy noticed that John's criminal behavior closely resembled the killer's methods in the Janet Taylor case. However, in the 1970s, DNA technology was unavailable, which prevented law enforcement from creating a DNA profile to confirm his guilt. Decades later, with advancements in DNA technology, John Guthrie was finally identified as the primary suspect in these brutal crimes. The investigators reanalyzed all the evidence they possessed at the time, which led to the development of a male DNA profile based on biological fluid traces collected from the victim's clothing. When this DNA was compared to a sample from John Guthrie, it was a 100% match, confirming him as the perpetrator. This revelation sparked mixed emotions, especially within the local community. Many criticized the police, as John had initially been wrongfully suspected of murdering Arliss Perry. The true perpetrator, when approached for arrest, took his own life, a tragic pattern that would repeat decades later. However, John was far from blameless in other violent incidents. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered that he had lived in Aga and New Jersey for several years, during which women frequently reported similar attacks. These findings suggested he may have been responsible for many more crimes. While authorities investigated John's potential involvement in other unsolved murders, prosecutors in 2 counties prepared for trials linked to separate cases. After the arrest of a suspect in Leslie's murder, the same individual was charged 6 months later with Janet's murder. In both cases, DNA evidence served as the primary foundation. Janet's and Leslie's families were determined to seek justice. They refused to negotiate, ensuring the criminal would face the full consequences of his actions. During the trial, Susan's daughter, Katie, who had suffered abuse at his hands and was familiar with John's cruel tendencies, provided crucial testimony. Upon learning about the murders, Katie was horrified to realize she could have become one of his victims. She recalled how she and John would pass the location where Leslie's body was found nearly every day on their way to school. At the time of both crimes, John was approximately 30 years old. Notably, witnesses described a suspect with long blonde hair at the scene, raising questions about whether John had an accomplice or whether he disguised himself by wearing a wig. On September 15, 2021, John Gautreaux, then 77 years old and in custody, was convicted of Janet Taylor's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2023, he confessed to Leslie Perloff's murder and received a second life sentence. While this confession offered some relief to the victims' families, it was devastating for John's loved ones, who had steadfastly believed in his innocence. Following these convictions, his children publicly disowned him. Later that year, John passed away in prison. According to the official report, his death was due to natural causes. Detectives remain convinced that he was responsible for other murders, but have yet to gather sufficient evidence to conclusively link him to additional crimes. It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal, but Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19. Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned £50,000. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages. Any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear. Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along. Perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy, they agreed to meet at around 5 p.m. But when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley. In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the 3rd time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife. But this time, she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress, and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR, while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding, indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. But the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested. But even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. But mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be. Anthony Pignataro was born in 1960 in Buffalo, New York, the youngest of two brothers. His father, Ralph Pignataro, was a well-known and highly respected surgeon in the community. After finishing high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and applied to several medical schools in the U.S. However, due to his low grades, he was not admitted to any of them. Eventually, he gained acceptance to a medical school in Puerto Rico, where he began his journey toward becoming a doctor. In 1978, 18 years old, Anthony met 21 years old Deborah at a club during a visit to his hometown. It was love at first sight. Anthony, tall and charming, swept Deborah off her feet as they danced to Donna Summer's Last Dance. Soon after meeting, they began a relationship. Despite their long-distance relationship, while Anthony studied in Puerto Rico and Deborah worked in New York, their love affair continued. Deborah was born and raised in Williamsville, New York, in a financially struggling family. She worked as a pharmacy assistant. In 1985, after graduating as an ENT doctor from medical school in Puerto Rico, Anthony returned to New York, obtained a medical license, and started working as a surgeon at a local hospital. However, his colleagues criticized his skills, calling him incompetent and predicting an unremarkable career. Despite this, he managed to keep his job. That same year, Anthony and Deborah got married. Early in their marriage, Deborah discovered through a friend that Anthony was having an affair. When she confided in her father, he advised her to forgive Anthony, but only once. Deborah decided to give him another chance. Not long after, they welcomed a son, and a year later, a daughter. They moved into a large home in suburban Buffalo, where Anthony started his own surgical practice. He rented office space in a private clinic and began seeing patients. By 1990, 30 years old, Anthony gained attention for inventing a wig prosthesis that was attached to the scalp using metal pins implanted in the skull. He became his own first client, as he had begun losing his hair at the age of 23. This wig became his patented invention. With prices starting at $3,500, clients could choose from a variety of natural and synthetic hair options. This invention contributed to his local fame. Anthony also performed cosmetic surgeries, such as breast augmentations, facelifts, rhinoplasties, liposuctions, and more. His services were competitively priced, and he often ran promotions to attract clients. Over the next 7 years, Anthony became wealthy and locally renowned, even driving a red Lamborghini. However, his reputation concealed the troubling events that were occurring in his operating room. In 1997, Terry Lamarty, a mother of 4, struggled to lose excess belly fat despite regular exercise. On her 39th birthday, her husband gave her a voucher for a belly liposuction treatment at Anthony's clinic. Excited, she scheduled a consultation with Anthony. During their meeting, she was impressed by his charisma and reassurances, which put her at ease. Anthony assured her that the procedure would go smoothly. Terry began preparing for the operation, undergoing necessary medical tests, consulting specialists, and completing the required paperwork. The surgery was scheduled for June 1997. On the day of her scheduled procedure at 8:30 a.m., Terry's husband drove her to the clinic. Upon arrival, she went to see Anthony to be examined and given medication to prepare for the surgery. He then wheeled her into the clinic's basement, referred to as the surgical center. To Terry's shock, the room looked nothing like a sterile operating theater. It was just an ordinary basement furnished with a couch, a table, and chairs. She didn't see any proper surgical equipment. Feeling uneasy, she tried to express her desire to cancel the operation, but she was already under the effects of the medication. Her speech slurred, and she lost control of her body. Before passing out, she helplessly screamed. Terry regained consciousness at 5 p.m., fully clothed and sitting on a small sofa in the clinic's first-floor waiting room. Her husband arrived shortly after and took her home. Once home, Terry noticed blood running down her legs. Panicked, she examined herself and found a roughly 10 centimeter long and 2 centimeter deep surgical incision on her stomach, poorly closed with about 20 metal staples. Alarmed, she and her husband immediately called Anthony over the phone. He dismissed their concerns, claiming the blood was excess surgical fluid and telling them not to worry. He assured them the wound was minor and advised Terry to rest and visit him the next morning. That night, Terry's pain became unbearable, worsening by the hour. She also experienced severe nausea and vomiting. By morning, she couldn't endure it anymore and called for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Anthony's stitches were blocking blood flow to her abdomen, causing some tissue to necrotize. On top of that, her intestines had been damaged during the procedure, leading to an infection in the wound. Instead of achieving her desired appearance, Terry was now fighting for her life. Fortunately, she received help in time and survived. A few days later, at 2:30 just while Terry was still recovering in the hospital, she was startled awake by Anthony. He had secretly entered her room and was holding her medical records. He demanded that she immediately pack her belongings and leave the hospital. Terrified, Terry refused and argued with him. Hospital nurses overheard the confrontation, and Anthony was forced to leave. After this alarming encounter, Terry remained in the hospital for several more days. Her recovery stretched on for months, and despite doctors reporting the incident to the State Department of Health, Anthony continued practicing medicine. 2 months later, in August 1997, a more tragic event occurred at Anthony's clinic. 26-year-old Sarah Smith, a mother of 2, underwent breast implant surgery, a procedure she had long dreamed of. During the operation, Sarah suffered cardiac arrest. Anthony called an ambulance, but when paramedics arrived, they found him trying to clear Sarah's airway using a wire hanger. The clinic lacked even basic life-saving medical equipment, like a ventilation device. Paramedics resuscitated Sarah on site and transported her to the hospital, but she had already fallen into a coma. After a week in intensive care, Sarah passed away on September 1, 1997. News of Sarah's death quickly spread, sparking a media frenzy. Anthony admitted that Sarah had stopped breathing during the surgery. He said he performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation and injected her with lidocaine, but it was ineffective. Ultimately, he instructed his assistants to call for an ambulance. An investigation by the Herald Police Department revealed that Sarah's death was caused by asphyxia due to severely low oxygen levels, which led to cardiac arrest. A toxicology report further showed that Anthony had administered a dangerously high dose of 2 muscle-relaxing drugs during the procedure, leaving Sarah unable to breathe on her own. After Sarah's death, the New York State Department of Health suspended Anthony Pignataro's medical license. Shortly thereafter, the Erie County District Attorney's Office in New York launched an investigation. Anthony, who had an inflated self-image, had opened his own plastic surgery clinic but failed to hire an anesthesiologist or adequately trained staff. Instead, his wife, Deborah, assisted him despite having only 6 months of medical training. Additionally, a young female medical student interned at the clinic. During Sarah's procedure, both Deborah and the intern reported that Sarah woke up mid-surgery, screaming. In response, Anthony administered additional drugs, causing Sarah to lose consciousness once again. Deborah noticed that Sarah's oxygen levels had dropped to a dangerously low level and alerted Anthony, but he ignored her and continued the operation. Shortly after, Sarah's lips turned blue. She stopped breathing, and her heart eventually stopped. Investigators interviewed Anthony's colleagues and patients, uncovering a reputation for gross incompetence and recklessness. Many of his patients had suffered complications following surgeries. For instance, 78 years old, Sophie Butring underwent a tummy tuck performed by Anthony. She became ill after the procedure, but was hesitant to seek medical attention. Her son eventually convinced her to go to the hospital, which saved her life. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, recovering from complications caused by the surgery. The New York State Board of Health eventually filed 30 charges of professional misconduct against Anthony. Investigators discovered that he was not licensed to perform plastic surgery and that his basement clinic was grossly unfit for medical procedures. In January 1998, Anthony, then 38 years old, was arrested. By August of that year, his medical license was permanently revoked. Anthony ultimately accepted a plea deal on a negligent homicide charge and was sentenced to 6 months in prison, fined $5,000, and ordered to complete 250 hours of community service. He was also permanently banned from practicing medicine. As the verdict was announced, the judge ordered Anthony to be taken into custody immediately. Deborah, who was visibly upset in the courtroom, was not allowed to say goodbye to her husband. However, if Deborah had known what lay ahead, she likely would not have shed any tears. In December 1998, Anthony was released from jail. He returned home to live with his wife and children, but struggled to find work. During this time, his mother provided financial support. Despite the challenges, he resumed an extramarital affair, which his wife, Deborah, eventually discovered. Furious, she kicked him out of the house. 2 months later, he returned, begging for a second chance, and she reluctantly took him back. By May 1999, Deborah, then 42 years old, suddenly fell gravely ill. She suffered episodes of nausea and body pain, which gradually worsened to include tingling in her arms and legs, difficulty walking, and extended periods confined to bed. Although Deborah sought medical help, doctors were initially unable to determine the cause of her symptoms. Over the following months, her condition continued to deteriorate. By the summer of 1999, she required a wheelchair and began experiencing memory loss. Anthony claimed her symptoms were caused by a diseased gallbladder, which he insisted needed urgent removal. However, Deborah's physician warned that surgery would be too dangerous and could result in her death. Eventually, toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of arsenic in Deborah's blood. A criminal investigation into Deborah's poisoning was launched. Tests conducted on her hair showed that she had been exposed to approximately 30 grams of arsenic in varying doses since May. During questioning, Deborah recalled that her symptoms began after eating soup Anthony had prepared for her. Investigators suspected Anthony had been poisoning her over time. Deborah granted police permission to search their home, where they discovered ant killer containing arsenic. Further evidence revealed that Anthony had purchased the poison using his credit card. He was subsequently brought in for questioning. Anthony admitted to poisoning Deborah, but suggested that the relatives of his deceased patient, Sarah, who passed away after surgery, might have been involved. Due to insufficient evidence, Anthony was released. Deborah was discharged from the hospital, though she remained in a wheelchair and needed ongoing treatment at home. Later, a former cellmate of Anthony's, who had shared a prison cell with him, contacted the police. The cellmate revealed that Anthony had discussed his wife, Deborah's life insurance policy, and his relationship with his mistress. According to the cellmate, Anthony confessed he wanted to start a new life with his mistress and obtain the insurance payout. He had even asked the cellmate for advice on poisoning someone. Recorded phone conversations confirmed that Anthony maintained contact with the cellmate after his release from prison. With this evidence, Anthony was arrested on May 9, 2000 for attempted murder. While he initially denied poisoning Deborah, he eventually pleaded guilty at the end of 2000. Prosecutors proved that Anthony had been adding small doses of poison to Deborah's food and planning to send her for gallbladder surgery, hoping she would die during the procedure. His motive was to prove he wasn't the only doctor to lose a patient on the operating table, reclaim his reputation, and regain financial success. He also sought to justify Sarah's death. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 12 years in prison. While incarcerated, he continued to file lawsuits, claiming that Deborah intentionally consumed arsenic to end her life. However, Deborah refuted this in interviews, stating she would never harm herself and even suggested Anthony should experience arsenic poisoning. Following the trial, she divorced Anthony and obtained a protective order prohibiting him from contacting her or their children. Deborah endured a lengthy recovery process after the poisoning. She revealed in interviews that she suffered lasting health issues, including reduced limb mobility and sensitivity, and required outside assistance for daily life. In December 2013, Anthony was released from prison and moved back to New York, where he worked as a grocery delivery man. He legally changed his name to Tony Hote in 2014, explaining that he wanted a fresh start. By 2016, he launched a cosmetic company and falsely portrayed himself as a practicing doctor on the business website. He marketed a product called the Plasma Protocol, claiming it was the first anti-aging skincare treatment derived from a person's DNA plasma. The company operated near his previous plastic surgery clinic. Neighbors began reporting suspicious activities at Anthony's residence, including deliveries of surgical supplies and frequent visits from women in the evenings. These reports prompted police attention, leading Anthony to shut down his business and move to Palm Beach, Florida, where his brother lived. New York police warned law enforcement in Palm Beach about Anthony, describing him as one of the most dangerous people they had ever encountered. By 2019, Anthony was advertising elder care services online and continued to move freely across the country. Florida authorities monitored him, but there remained concerns about whether he posed a risk to others. As for Deborah, she maintained a private life and struggled with the lasting impact of Anthony's actions, unable to fully recover her health or independence. Samantha Vernagallo and Drew Garnier first crossed paths as young adults on Long Island, New York, where they both grew up. While the specifics of their first meeting remain private, it's clear that their connection blossomed during their early 20s. Samantha, who lives in Center Reach, is a former student of Center Reach High School. She is well liked for her warm, caring personality and her dream of raising a happy family. Drew, from nearby Lake Grove, shared her aspirations for a traditional family life. Over time, their bond deepened as they discovered they both envisioned the same future: marriage, children, and building a meaningful life together. Samantha appreciates Drew's stability and commitment to creating a safe living environment. Those who know them see them as a loving couple, working toward a common goal of a happy future. Thanks to the support from their family, both Samantha and Drew grew up mature and did not face any serious issues. Neither had a troubling past. No criminal records, substance abuse, or significant mental health concerns. Drew held steady employment and showed dedication to supporting his growing family, while Samantha was known for her beauty, compassion, and devotion to her loved ones. After several years together, they married and had 2 daughters, Adelina, followed by Izzy. 3 years later, Samantha embraced motherhood wholeheartedly, always putting her daughters first and ensuring they felt safe and loved. As the family grew, they began to feel the financial pressures of living on Long Island, dreaming of a quieter, more affordable life where their daughters could thrive. Samantha and Drew decided to leave Long Island and relocate to Masonville, a small town in Delaware County, New York, situated in the scenic Catskills region, about 150 miles northwest of New York City. Masonville offered the simpler lifestyle they desired: lower living costs, a close-knit community, and a peaceful environment where children could safely play and grow. The family settled into a mobile home on Hook Road, a quiet area where neighbors knew one another and a sense of community prevailed. For Samantha and Drew, the move symbolized a fresh start. Samantha envisioned an idyllic childhood for her daughters, filled with natural beauty, fresh air, and the security of a supportive community. She remained fully committed to her family, caring deeply for her 9-year-old daughter Adelina and 6-year-old Izzy. Drew quickly adapted to the new lifestyle as well, finding work and showing dedication to his family. From the outside, Drew and Samantha Garnier appeared to have a strong marriage and a happy family life. Their life in Masonville seemed stable and focused on building a better future for their 2 daughters. Their joy grew even more when Samantha found out she was pregnant with their 3rd child. By September 2024, she was 5 months along and had learned they were expecting another daughter. For Samantha, this news brought immense happiness. She cherished being a mother and was excited about welcoming another little girl. However, those close to the family noticed that Drew's reaction to the news was quite different. While Samantha celebrated the idea of another daughter, Drew had been hoping for a son. Family members later revealed that Drew's desire for a boy had intensified with each pregnancy. Hearing they would have a third daughter deeply disappointed him and seemed to affect him in ways that no one could have foreseen. Despite this hidden tension, there were no visible signs that Drew was capable of violence. He had no criminal record, history of domestic abuse, or encounters with law enforcement. To their neighbors, their family was an ordinary family, adapting to life in a small town. Samantha, although noticing subtle changes in Drew's behavior, remained focused on her family and the upcoming birth of their third daughter in February 2025. She also looked forward to celebrating her 30th birthday, just 2 weeks away. Life in their family household carried on as usual during late summer and early fall of 2024. Adelina and Izzy, the daughters, went to school each day. Samantha managed the house while preparing for the new baby, and Drew went to work. Anyone observing the family would have seen a picture of normalcy, but underneath, Drew's disappointment about the baby's gender was quietly festering. With no outward signs of trouble, no calls to the police or family interventions, no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. Those who later tried to understand Drew's actions were baffled. On the surface, he seemed to have everything: a loving wife, 2 healthy daughters, steady employment, and another child on the way. Samantha had built a life filled with love and stability for their family, but for reasons no one could fathom, the good things in Drew's life became a source of anger. On the night of Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, just days after Labor Day, their household appeared to be winding down from a normal day. Adelina and Izzy were likely getting ready for bed, and Samantha, 5 months pregnant, was caring for her daughters and preparing for the evening. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but beneath the surface, Drew's frustrations had reached their breaking point. At around 11:29 p.m., the quiet town of Masonville was jolted by an emergency that shocked the entire community. Drew called 911 to report what he described as a domestic dispute at their family home. To the dispatcher, Drew sounded like a man trying to help his wife. He claimed Samantha had been injured and that he was applying pressure to her wounds to stop the bleeding. However, when police arrived at the scene, they discovered a horrifying scene that was completely opposite to what Drew described, permanently shattering the image of a peaceful family. New York State Police troopers Corey King and Ronald King were dispatched to respond to an emergency call. When the troopers arrived at the mobile home with its covered porch, they were prepared to assist what they believed was an injured woman. Instead, they were confronted with an unthinkable scene. As they approached, Drew briefly stuck his head out the front door before quickly retreating inside. His suspicious behavior immediately alerted the troopers that something was wrong. Shortly after, a single gunshot echoed from inside the house, sending shockwaves through the officers. They quickly retreated to the end of the driveway and called for backup from a Delaware County Sheriff's deputy, using the deputy's patrol car as cover. The officers cautiously approached the house again. Suddenly, Adelina, a 9-year-old girl, emerged from the home, running toward the police with her clothes soaked in blood. The officers' hearts sank as they realized this child had witnessed unimaginable violence. Through tears, Adelina told the officers that her mother had been stabbed and that her father, Drew, was still inside the house with a gun. As they worked to protect Adelina, her 6-year-old sibling, Izzy, also ran out, similarly covered in blood. Both sisters were deeply affected by the horrific events that had just occurred. Despite being injured and in shock, they still tried to talk to the police. The officers provided first aid to the children and called for additional medical assistance. It was clear that both girls had endured a horrific ordeal. Once they were safely transported to receive medical care, the focus turned back to Drew inside the house. The officers called out for him to surrender, and to their surprise, he walked out of the home with his hands raised. Drew was immediately arrested without resistance. The officers noted he was covered in blood and had cuts on his hands. During his arrest, police found a butter knife in his pocket, a chilling piece of evidence that would later shed light on the brutal events of that night. Inside the house, the officers found Samantha lying on her side, critically injured with multiple stab wounds. Despite their efforts to provide life-saving aid, it was clear her injuries were severe. Emergency medical personnel arrived, and Samantha was airlifted to Wilson Medical Center in Johnson City. Both daughters, Izzy and Adelina, were flown to Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse as well, due to the severity of their injuries. Investigators later determined that all three victims had been subjected to a prolonged and brutal attack. Tragically, Samantha succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. She was only 29 years old and just 2 weeks away from her 30th birthday. Her unborn daughter, whom she had been 5 months pregnant with, also did not survive. Adelina and Izzy remained hospitalized in serious condition but were expected to recover physically. However, the emotional trauma they endured would require extensive therapy and support for years. Drew was transported to A.O. Fox Hospital for treatment of superficial self-inflicted wounds. After receiving care, he was processed at the New York State Police Barracks in Sydney. He was charged and faced full legal accountability for the horrific attack. The investigation that followed was detailed and exhaustive, led by New York State Police, with support from the Delaware County Sheriff's Office and local law enforcement agencies. Major Lucas Shooter, commander of Troop C, held a press conference on September 6, 2024, to provide new information regarding the arrest and charges in the case. What made this case particularly unsettling for investigators was that it marked the first time the state police had been called to Samantha and Drew's residence for a domestic issue. There were no prior reports, no history of domestic violence, and no indication that Drew was capable of such violence toward his own family. As the investigation progressed, police discovered additional alarming evidence. A search of the property revealed that Drew owned multiple firearms and 2 high-capacity ammunition-feeding devices. These findings led to weapons-related charges being added to the list of crimes he faced. On September 5, 2024, Drew Garnier was officially charged with second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. He was arraigned at Delhi Town Court and sent to the Delaware County Jail without bail. Recognizing the gravity of the case, Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith quickly convened an emergency grand jury session. On September 11, 2024, the grand jury issued an 8-count indictment against Drew. In addition to the original charges, the indictment included weapons violations, second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, criminal use of a firearm, and multiple counts of illegal weapon possession. Drew pleaded not guilty to all charges at his arraignment before Delaware County Court. Judge John L. Hubbard, who ordered him to remain in the custody of the Delaware County Sheriff's Office without bail. If convicted on all charges, Drew faced a potential sentence of 25 years to life in prison. However, as the case advanced, it became evident that going to trial would force his daughters, Adelina and Izzy, to relive the trauma of that horrific night by testifying. To prevent further emotional harm to the girls, prosecutors opted for a negotiated plea deal. On March 25, 2025, Drew pleaded guilty to reduced charges of first-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of first-degree assault in exchange for a total sentence of 30 years in state prison, followed by 15 years of post-release supervision. District Attorney Smith explained that, although the sentence was lower than the maximum possible sentence, the agreement was in the best interests of Izzy and Adelina. The sentencing hearing took place on May 13, 2025, in Delaware County Court. The courtroom was filled with family members, community members, and court officials. During the hearing, only one victim impact statement was read, that of Samantha's father, Gregory Vernagallo. He provided critical insight into what had driven the crime. Gregory informed the court that Drew had wanted a boy and became furious when he found out Samantha was pregnant with their third daughter. He explained that this shocking revelation, that gender disappointment had motivated such horrific violence, had added a deeply disturbing dimension to an already tragic case. He also shared that he had adopted his two granddaughters and devoted his life to raising them, stating that he was their father now and would protect them. He added that he hadn't left their sides since the attack. When given the chance to speak, Drew addressed the court with apparent remorse and expressed his regret to his in-laws, especially his children. He also expressed hope that someday he could make amends with his kids. He said he would not force anything on them and respected their decisions, but added that if they ever wanted to see him, he hoped he would be allowed to be there for them. Public defender Joseph Hermedi emphasized the lack of logic behind the crime, stating that his client, Drew, had no explanation for what had happened. Joseph described the situation as extremely tragic and mentioned that he didn't believe anyone would disagree with that assessment. Judge John L. Hubbard considered Drew's clean record before sentencing him. The judge said Drew had taken the life of his wife and harmed his children, who were entitled to his protection, and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. During the hearing, Drew asked for permission to continue contact with his daughters, Izzy and Adelina, while incarcerated. Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith strongly opposed the request, urging the court to impose the longest possible no-contact orders. Judge John agreed and issued stay-away orders for both Izzy and Adelina until 2056, which is 8 years beyond Drew's maximum potential release date. The judge added that if the daughters ever wished to contact their father, they could petition the court to revise the protective orders. Drew refused to sign the court orders, but they were served to him in court regardless. His refusal was seen as further resistance to accepting responsibility for his actions against his children. This heartbreaking case has had devastating consequences for all involved. Samantha and Drew's two daughters, Adelina and Izzy, are now orphans because of their father's actions. The girls are now legally adopted by their grandfather Gregory and have moved to a new home to settle down and receive better care. A GoFundMe campaign organized by Aaron Leahy from Center raised over $16,000 to support Izzy and Adelina. The campaign described Samantha, the girl's mother, as compassionate and loving. It revealed that Samantha was pregnant with a baby girl due in February 2025 and was just weeks away from celebrating her 30th birthday when her life was tragically cut short. The crime shocked the residents of Masonville, a small, peaceful community where such acts of violence are extremely rare. District Attorney Sean Smith commended law enforcement for their diligent investigation and dedication. He mentioned that what made the case especially chilling was the lack of any warning signs that could have foreshadowed such violence. Drew Garnier had no prior criminal record, mental health issues, or prior interactions with law enforcement. The revelation that gender disappointment over an unborn child could escalate to the murder of a pregnant wife and an attack on his daughters serves as a sobering reminder of how domestic violence can erupt without any prior indications. The car had gone off the road and landed in a ditch. At first, it was quiet, but then smoke began to rise. Inside, a woman wasn't moving. Her husband stood outside, simply watching. He didn't call for help. Malcolm John Webster was born on April 18, 1959 in Wandsworth, Greater London. On the surface, his background appeared stable, even enviable. His father, Alexander Robertson Webster, held a high-ranking position within the Metropolitan Police, serving as a detective chief superintendent in the fraud squad. His mother, Odette Blewett, had once worked as a nurse, but gave up her profession to raise their children behind closed doors. However, the family home was governed by unrelenting discipline and an unsettling set of rules. Alexander ran the household with absolute control. When he used the bathroom, everyone else had to vacate the house. Meals were taken in silence unless he initiated a conversation. Emotional warmth was rare, and affection was nearly absent. Major family decisions, including financial matters, were handled solely by Alexander. From an early age, Malcolm displayed troubling signs. While his twin sister, Caroline, easily made friends, Malcolm struggled to connect, but rather than withdraw quietly, he developed unusual ways of attracting attention. He began pretending to faint, often collapsing at convenient moments to avoid chores or responsibilities. His apparent health issues led to speculative diagnoses, ranging from asthma to epilepsy. Yet, no solid medical explanation was ever confirmed. Doctors prescribed medications based on symptoms, never seeking a definitive cause. As sympathy began to fade, Malcolm escalated his attention, seeking behavior. He became fascinated with fire, setting small blazes in school and earning the nickname Pyro from classmates. Though these incidents never resulted in formal charges, they left other parents uneasy. Children were warned to stay away from him, and isolation became his norm. At home, comparisons with his more sociable sister only deepened his resentment. His parents, hoping to give him a fresh start, enrolled him in a private boys' school. Initially, Malcolm appeared to flourish. He joined the drama club, improved his grades, and reinvented himself. He claimed his family was wealthy and well-connected, but his lies eventually caught up with him, and once again, trust in him eroded. At 15, Malcolm was pulled out of school. He didn't resist. Education no longer interested him. He wanted independence and income. In his early career, he struggled to find work he enjoyed. He drifted from job to job, including garbage collection, fruit picking, and retail. But none of these roles gave him a sense of purpose or satisfaction. At 17, guided by his mother, Malcolm began training as a nurse. Surprisingly, he thrived and began a serious relationship, which ended suddenly due to a terminated pregnancy and the resulting emotional distress. However, Malcolm persevered. When he was 30, Malcolm worked in Tawam Hospital, on the children's ward in Abu Dhabi, UAE. It was here that his criminal tendencies surfaced. Trusted by elderly residents, he volunteered to manage their finances, only to siphon off their savings for personal luxuries, including rounds of drinks and expensive golf equipment. When that scam lost steam, he shifted tactics. He started targeting older, wealthier women. His charm was disarming, and his lies were convincing. Posing as a struggling young man with tales of hardship, he extracted money and gifts with calculated precision. In the late 1980s, within months, 3 children with special needs died under his care. Each suffered sudden cardiac arrests. There were no signs of illness beforehand, no medical warning signs. Though no autopsies were conducted, whispers began circulating among the staff. But in a region where autopsies were culturally discouraged, no investigations followed. Malcolm simply left the country without consequences. Back in the UK, he resumed his life as though nothing had happened. He found work as a nurse and began cultivating his social image once more. At a party, he met a woman named Claire Morris. She was born on December 26, 1961, just 2 years after Malcolm. She grew up in a secure, affluent household and had a younger brother named Peter Morris. Claire was the kind of person who lit up a room, outgoing, confident, and full of energy. She was popular because of her lively personality. One evening, she met Malcolm at a party, and he was immediately drawn to her charm. Claire represented everything he admired: warmth, vitality, and a strong sense of self. The two struck up a conversation and quickly began spending time together. On the surface, their relationship progressed naturally, but beneath the surface, doubts quietly stirred. Claire's mother, Betty Morris, had reservations from the beginning. There was something about Malcolm that didn't sit right with her. Though she couldn't quite articulate it, her instincts whispered caution. Peter, on the other hand, initially welcomed Malcolm into the family, finding him clever and polite, perhaps a bit of a rogue, but nothing more. From Malcolm's perspective, Claire was radiant. His twin sister Caroline described Claire as generous and kind-hearted, someone who brought genuine happiness into her brother's life. Even Odette, Malcolm's emotionally distant mother, spoke positively of her. For once, it seemed Malcolm had found a partner who might steer his life in the right direction. They married on September 3rd, 1993. The ceremony was beautiful. Claire looked radiant, and Malcolm performed his role to perfection. The devoted husband, charming and attentive. Friends and family left the celebration believing they had a bright future ahead of them. Young, in love, and financially stable. Everything appeared idyllic, but everything changed just 9 months later. On May 27, 1994, tragedy struck. Malcolm and Claire had been driving along a quiet rural road, with Malcolm at the wheel and Claire beside him. According to his account, a motorcyclist suddenly appeared on the wrong side of the road, forcing him to swerve. He claimed to have overcorrected, sending the vehicle into a ditch. Moments later, the car burst into flames. Malcolm escaped. Claire did not. He was taken to hospital and kept under observation for a week. He complained of pain, appeared emotionally broken, and wore a neck brace. But scans and medical tests showed no significant injuries. There were no broken bones, no burns, and no smoke inhalation. His physical condition was inconsistent with the violent wreckage he described. At Claire's funeral, Malcolm appeared inconsolable, barely able to speak. Peter held his hand throughout the ceremony, unaware that the man he was comforting would later spend Claire's life insurance payout, £200,000, an enormous sum in 1994 on a £30,000 yacht, a new Range Rover, and other lavish expenses. The money vanished quickly. Questions began to surface. Why hadn't Claire managed to escape the car, as Malcolm had investigators confirmed that while the car had veered off the road, the crash hadn't been severe. It wasn't traveling at high speed, and the damage didn't suggest a violent impact. The fire's origin remained unknown. Even more troubling was that when Malcolm phoned for help, he told dispatchers the vehicle was empty. Despite his wife being inside, he never mentioned Claire. Despite these troubling details, no formal charges were ever brought. The case was closed, and Malcolm's life continued undisturbed by suspicion. Behind the scenes, he had already moved on. Soon after Claire's death, Malcolm began a secret affair with Geraldine Oakley, a hospital IT manager. Publicly, he was a grieving widower trying to rebuild his life. Privately, Geraldine began noticing unusual behavior. Malcolm talked about Claire's death in unsettlingly clinical terms, often circling back to whether a second autopsy would be ordered. His cold fascination with the topic disturbed her deeply. Geraldine confided her concerns to a consultant pathologist. She feared there was more to Claire's death than anyone realized. Eventually, unable to reconcile her suspicions with their relationship, Geraldine walked away. Unfazed, Malcolm shifted locations once again. By 1995, he was living in Saudi Arabia. There, he connected with a woman named Brenda Grant over the phone. They eventually met in person a few times, but the friendship ended abruptly when, according to Brenda, Malcolm offered her illegal substances, an offer she firmly declined. After his stay in Saudi Arabia, Malcolm relocated once more, this time crossing hemispheres entirely and settling in New Zealand in the mid-1990s. No longer working as a nurse, he presented himself as a computer specialist. At a dinner party that month, he met Felicity Drum, a bright, outgoing cancer nurse. She was intelligent, well-spoken, and 3 years younger than Malcolm. Her personality was magnetic, polished, lively, and full of warmth. For a man like Malcolm, she was the perfect mark. He played the role to perfection, attentive, affectionate, and emotionally present. To Felicity, he seemed sensitive and grounded, often speaking of life's fragility and how important it was not to waste time. Within months, they were inseparable. By January 1997, Malcolm had proposed. They married that April in Auckland, and for their honeymoon, they retreated to the idyllic Bay of Islands. But amid the calm beaches and scenic beauty, a far darker undercurrent began to emerge. Felicity later recounted one disturbing episode from the trip. She drank a cup of tea, prepared by Malcolm, and fell into a deep, unnatural sleep that lasted nearly 36 hours. It wasn't a one-off. In the months that followed, she experienced troubling health issues, double vision, unsteadiness, periods of confusion, and extended bouts of sleep, all suspiciously occurring after eating or drinking something provided by her husband. When she raised her concerns, Malcolm dismissed them as stress-related. Doctors were consulted, but none could pinpoint the cause. Tests showed abnormal liver function, usually associated with substance abuse or medication toxicity, neither of which applied to Felicity, who lived a healthy lifestyle. Still, Malcolm continued preparing all her meals, always at her side, always in control. Their home life soon took on a sinister pattern. Fires began to follow them. One broke out at Felicity's parents' house while the couple was staying there, another at a rental cottage, and a third at a property they were considering purchasing. These accidents left Felicity uneasy, but she brushed them off until Malcolm encouraged her to take out a life insurance policy. She agreed. In 1998, they welcomed a son. From the outside, it looked like a happy family. Malcolm was attentive, affectionate, and often seen doting on his child, but his affection masked a growing deception. In early 1999, Felicity and Malcolm planned to purchase a home in Auckland. Malcolm repeatedly stalled the payment, claiming the funds from a UK bank transfer hadn't cleared. As the February 12th deadline approached, the pressure mounted. That day, Malcolm and Felicity headed to the bank together. During the drive, Malcolm began complaining about the car's steering. Then, without warning, the vehicle veered across 2 lanes and slammed into a ditch. Felicity grabbed the wheel in panic and found it responsive. Nothing about the car's handling felt off. Malcolm got out of the car and asked her to stay put. However, she disobeyed and got out to call the bank, probably to reschedule their meeting. Just a week after the crash, Malcolm arranged a picnic in a remote area. During the drive, the couple argued, nothing major. Then, in an apparent peace offering, Malcolm handed her a bottle of water. Moments later, Felicity passed out. She awoke hours later in the passenger seat, disoriented and groggy. The car was now deep within a forest. Her phone rang. It was her father, worried after not hearing from her. When Malcolm returned to the car and saw her awake, he looked startled, alarmed even. He climbed into the car, tense, and asked how she had managed to regain consciousness. Felicity didn't know. Her head spun. Her memory was foggy, but one thing was clear. Something was terribly wrong. She demanded he take her home immediately. Back at the house, with her senses returning, she started asking questions. Why had they been in the middle of the forest? What had caused her to pass out? Malcolm dodged her inquiries. Then he suddenly clutched his chest and claimed he might be having a heart attack. He rushed off, allegedly heading to the hospital. Hours later, he returned with an astonishing announcement. Doctors had diagnosed him with leukemia, but this was no cry for help. It was a distraction. Felicity's father had already harbored suspicions about his son-in-law. After speaking to the family solicitor, Felicity's father began investigating Malcolm's finances. What he found changed everything. Together, father and daughter searched through Malcolm's belongings and discovered a key to a private mailbox. Inside were damning documents. A bank statement showed that Malcolm had secretly moved 140,000 New Zealand dollars from a joint account into a personal one in Aberdeenshire. Credit card bills revealed he was drowning in debt. Felicity's father took immediate action, securing a court injunction that legally barred Malcolm from the family home. By the time it was served, Malcolm had vanished. He fled New Zealand just as Felicity began to uncover the full scope of the betrayal. Medical tests later confirmed what she had feared. Her body contained dangerously high levels of sedatives, drugs she had never knowingly taken. Once Malcolm was gone, the symptoms vanished as if they'd never existed. The man she had loved, trusted, and married had slowly and methodically poisoned her. Her suspicions, once only instinct, had now hardened into certainty. While searching through their shared email account, Felicity uncovered damning messages to a UK estate agent. Malcolm had been posing as a single father, planning a quiet relocation to Cornwall with their son. He was arranging to move by the end of 1999. He arranged to move out at the end of 1999. Not a word of this was shared with Felicity. Then came a discovery that changed everything. In the boot of the car Malcolm had abandoned, she found a petrol canister. It was the final piece. A horrifying realization dawned. He had intended to replicate the exact circumstances of his first wife, Claire's death. The plan had almost succeeded until her father's well-timed phone call had inadvertently saved her life. Felicity now understood the forest, the unconsciousness, the steering failure, the sedatives. It had all been part of a carefully rehearsed script. She managed to confront Malcolm once. Calmly, she told him she knew what he had tried to do. His reply chilled her to the bone. "You would have died happy." That sentence shattered any lingering doubts. Malcolm hadn't just deceived and manipulated her. He had plotted her death with methodical precision. For Felicity, the illusion was destroyed. She now knew she had married a murderer. She went straight to the police. In July 2000, New Zealand authorities issued 4 arrest warrants against Malcolm Webster. The charges were severe, including arson, drugging his wife, and administering substances with intent to cause harm. But Malcolm was already gone, having fled the country before he could face justice. From that point on, he was officially a wanted man. As the investigation unfolded, more details emerged. Felicity had only been aware of one life insurance policy, but Malcolm had secretly forged 8 more, with a combined value nearing 2 million New Zealand dollars. His motivation had always been clear: control, deception, and financial gain, no matter the cost. What he did next was true to form. In 2000, Malcolm slipped back into the United Kingdom. He confessed nothing to his family and resumed life as if nothing had happened. He found work, played the role of a respectable man, and once again sought out wealthy women. In August 2004, he met Simone Banerjee at a hospital. He worked in nurse administration. She managed the surgical theater. The two soon became a couple. By 2006, they were engaged. To Simone, Malcolm was a sensitive soul. He shared stories about his supposed battle with leukemia, disappearing for hours and claiming he'd been undergoing treatment. He told her of his tragic past, including the accidental death of his first wife, Claire. He even claimed certain television scenes, fires, car crashes were too traumatic to watch. Simone believed him. She had no idea he was still legally married to Felicity Drum, or that he was a fugitive in New Zealand, or that he had already tried to murder 2 women. But police hadn't stopped tracking him and found him living openly in Aberdeen under his real name. Simone might never have learned the truth had authorities not contacted her directly, warning her of the grave danger she was in. At first, she refused to believe it, but when she confronted Malcolm, he turned pale, packed a bag, mumbled an apology, and walked out. Malcolm Webster was arrested in July 2007 in Scotland. The investigation, known as Operation Field, became an international effort involving over 1,000 witness interviews across multiple countries. Prosecutors charged him with the murder of Claire Morris, the attempted murder of Felicity Drum, and attempting to marry Simone Banerjee under false pretenses to gain access to her estate. As part of the reopened case, Claire's body was exhumed. Forensic analysis revealed that, like Felicity, she had been heavily sedated before her death. This confirmed what many had suspected. Claire hadn't been able to escape the burning car because Malcolm had drugged her, incapacitating her. It was also revealed that Felicity was drugged, even while she was pregnant with their son. The trial would go down in Scottish legal history. It became the longest trial involving a single defendant the country had ever seen. In May 2011, Malcolm Webster was found guilty on all charges. On July 5, 2011, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. Simone later described herself as lucky to be alive. The courtroom testimonies painted a portrait of a man who used trust as a weapon, staging car crashes, setting fires, poisoning those closest to him, and weaving webs of lies for profit. Psychologists diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, manipulative, deceitful, and utterly lacking in empathy. Even after his conviction, Malcolm refused to accept responsibility. In December 2013, he applied to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, hoping to have his sentence overturned. The process dragged on, but in February 2016, his request was officially rejected. The High Court saw no grounds for an appeal. After a comprehensive investigation into the events of Malcolm Webster's life, the authorities discovered that he had carried out a series of systematic and calculated crimes, mainly for financial gain, through fraud and murder. The investigation, known as Operation Field, spanned 5 years and involved interviews with more than 1,000 witnesses across several countries, revealing a terrifying pattern of manipulation. Malcolm poisoned his first wife, Claire Morris, with temazepam before staging a car crash in 1994 to collect $200,000 in insurance money, spending lavishly on a yacht and a Range Rover. He continued to poison his second wife, Felicity Drum, even when she was pregnant, and forged 9 insurance policies worth $750,000 while also setting 3 fires at her parents' home, a rented house, and a property he intended to buy. Authorities also discovered that Malcolm had attempted to enter into a sham marriage with Simone Banerjee to gain her wealth, with plans to drown her in a boat accident. He also had other relationships, including with Christina Willis, Anne Hancock, and a 15-year-old girl who ended up having an abortion, all of which he either deceived or exploited financially. In Abu Dhabi, Malcolm was suspected of injecting insulin to kill 3 children in his care, although evidence was lacking due to a culture that discouraged autopsies. He had lied about having cancer as a teenager, foreshadowing a decades-long scam. After his arrest in 2007, a search of Simone's home revealed stolen laptops and unlicensed guns. Malcolm was convicted in 2011 of murder, attempted murder, arson, burglary, fraud, poisoning, and attempted marriage fraud, removed from the nursing register in 2013, and attacked in prison, where he hired a hitman to protect him. These revelations exposed a manipulative psychopath diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder who showed no remorse even after being sentenced to life in prison. Malcolm Webster is currently serving his life sentence at a prison in Lanarkshire, Scotland. On a quiet afternoon in January, the small town in Waller County, Texas, was suddenly shaken by a scene so horrifying that even the most seasoned police officers shuddered. In a guest house located on a large plot of land owned by a wealthy family, blood was splattered on the floor, covering the walls and ceiling. In the middle of the room, the body of a young woman lay motionless, her head severed, a bloody knife thrown next to her. It was Angie, just 21 years old, an immigrant from Nicaragua with dreams of building a bright future in America. The person standing in that room, eerily calm, was her husband, Jared Dicus, 23 years old, the only son of a prestigious family in the area. How did a love story once considered the American dream turn into a terrible tragedy? Why would a young man born into wealth, raised in a powerful family, commit such a barbaric crime? This is not just a murder, but a bloody warning about the control and violence hidden behind the facade of a seemingly perfect marriage. And to understand how things spiraled into tragedy, we have to go back to the beginning, where 2 seemingly opposite people collided. Jared Dicus was born and raised in Waller County, Texas, just over an hour's drive from Houston. His family was famous and wealthy in the area, owning a lot of real estate and land. They lived in a large house, prominent amidst the vast farms. Previously, the family had a large house and a smaller guest house, but as he grew up, the guest house was converted into his own private residence. Jared chose to live there, realizing the dream of many young Americans by not having to rent a house. He and his young wife, Angie, have lived here together. Angie was born in Nicaragua in 2001. When she grew up, she immigrated to the United States in search of a better life. Unlike Jared, her career path was initially difficult. Angie was born into a poor family. From a young age, she witnessed financial hardship. This made her hardworking and always helping her family. She is also a calm and friendly person. When she came to America, she kept a calm attitude, liked to work to support herself and help her family. Angie dreamed of building a good future. She wanted to marry an American, to settle down and receive support. With her charming appearance and sweet personality, she attracted Jared from the first meeting. At that time, she had just moved here and did not have many friends. In just a few years, Angie found a place to live and did many things at the same time. Everyone saw that she was happy with her successes. She had many big plans for the future and believed in a good life in America, but she did not expect that she was wrong. Jared and Angie's lives intersected at the end of 2022. Those who know Jared all realized that he was attracted to Angie from the first meeting. He described her as an energetic and charming girl with whom he wanted to build a romantic relationship. Angie, on the other hand, had similar feelings and took the initiative to approach Jared. She saw in him the ideal future husband and father. Despite the cultural and language barriers, her English was not good. She took the initiative. Surprisingly, just a month after meeting, in October 2022, they announced their marriage. They held a small, private ceremony. At first glance, their story seemed like a dream come true for Angie. She had her own house in a small town, and it seemed that this girl from Nicaragua could build an ideal American family, have children, and develop a career. Jared had everything she needed to help her do that. Jared was the son of a wealthy family, had no money problems. He truly loved Angie. However, behind this perfect appearance, everything was not good. Before getting married, Angie regularly updated her social media profile, posting photos and various posts, but after getting married, the number of posts gradually decreased. She almost stopped taking photos with Jared after the wedding. Relatives began to ask about this change, because it was unlike the active and sociable girl like Angie, but she avoided these questions. Many people suspected that Jared had forbidden her to do those things. Angie just evaded, saying that there was no violence in their relationship, but admitted that her husband had an influence on her, making her emotionally exhausted. This did not surprise anyone. Although Jared's family was considered kind, many locals knew that he had a criminal record. He also had problems with banned substances and alcohol. His parents knew this, but they did not tell Angie because they believed that marriage would have a positive effect on their son and that he would give up his bad habits. However, the reality was quite the opposite. Soon after the wedding, Jared began to behave worse. The community knew Jared was prone to drunkenness, using banned substances, and behaving inappropriately. He was aggressive and often in trouble with the law. His first drunk driving arrest, compounded by threats to the police, brought him to their attention. Many believed he avoided jail only because of his wealthy parents. Some locals hoped Angie could help Jared change after the two got married. After the wedding, they moved into a large guest house on Jared's family land. The parents gave them the long unused guest house, hoping they would be comfortable and independent. However, this plan backfired on Angie, who became isolated instead of finding peace. Jared controlled her communication with her family, completely dominating her life with his family, rules, and habits. Angie, a resilient woman who had overcome many challenges since moving to the United States, viewed this as another obstacle. She had grown up in harsh conditions and worked hard to improve her life, initially arriving in Texas without documents, leading to constant fear of deportation to Nicaragua. Before the wedding, finding and registering for a job was difficult. Angie hoped marriage and legal status would ease her struggles, but Jared quickly exploited this vulnerability, pressuring her into submission. She feared losing everything she had worked for if she divorced him. Before meeting Jared, she had taken on numerous part-time jobs to make ends meet. After the wedding, she continued this relentless work ethic, waking before dawn to work at a local gym and then working at a fast food restaurant until late. Marriage did not bring the ease she had hoped for. She still had to work constantly. However, after the wedding, some jobs became irrelevant. She had to look for new part-time jobs, while Jared remained mostly unemployed. He found occasional work, but rarely stayed longer than a month. The small town likely contributed to his difficulties. Everyone knew of Jared's troubled past, making it hard for him to find steady employment. Some believed he was struggling to find his place, while others saw him as exploiting his parents' wealth. He could be charming when he wanted to be. However, this charm faded after marrying Angie, revealing his impulsiveness, insecurity, and anger. Angie was unaware of Jared's persistent behavioral problems until they became apparent after they were married. Within the first month, things changed. Angie began to withdraw from her friends and loved ones. Co-workers noticed her shift from cheerful to depressed, often seeing her crying in secret. She started wearing long sleeves, even in hot weather, as if hiding something. The situation was further complicated by the language barrier. Jared didn't speak Spanish, and Angie's English was limited. Eventually, her inner circle realized that Jared had become her de facto translator, her only link to the outside world, a role he manipulated for his own benefit. He began to control and dominate her. Even as his banned substance use increased, he would leave home and return late at night. Neighbors began to hear their loud arguments and screaming. In public, Angie acted as if everything was fine. She didn't share her problems, kept working hard, and avoided discussing her family life. Many people suspect she was abused both physically and mentally, but she has never confirmed it. She often showed her forearms without bruises, despite wearing long sleeves. She explained her new preference for modest clothing as a response to her husband's jealousy. He didn't want other men looking at her. In late 2022, 3 months after their marriage, those close to Angie and Jared sensed deep tension. The honeymoon ended quickly. Jared, a strong and unstable young man, became increasingly dominant and showed little concern for Angie. She struggled to talk about her problems due to a language barrier and her husband's strict control. She had no family in the U.S. to rely on. They lived on Jared's family estate, and although Jared's parents could have helped, they did not intervene. Angie's co-workers, who had known her for years, noticed she had changed. She once laughed off Jared's quirks, but later confided to a few friends that he controlled her completely. She still hoped things would improve, but they didn't. She told friends Jared often came home drunk, leading to frequent arguments. Angie began arriving at work, exhausted. She continued to deny domestic violence, yet understood she was in a vulnerable position. Her family was thousands of miles away. She had no car, little support, and her immigration status made her fearful and dependent on Jared. His parents also noticed changes in him. He grew withdrawn, irritable, and aggressive. They felt Angie pushed back against his behavior rather than trying to control him, but still did nothing. Believing the relationship would eventually make Jared more responsible, they think Angie and Jared just need time. Perhaps Jared's parents felt more at ease because Angie and Jared lived nearby, and their quarrels seemed to be nothing more than shouting. No one had seen physical violence. Angie believed Jared's behavior was driven by alcohol and banned substances, which made him paranoid and aggressive. By the end of 2022, Angie told a friend she was determined to help Jared return to normal. Loyal and supportive by nature, she didn't want to give up. But the crisis continued. In early January 2023, she posted a short video on social media, She was drinking coffee alone, listening to music, and appeared happier by herself than with her husband. The post had a brief, reflective caption. Tragically, she had only days left to live. The morning of January 11, 2023, began like any other. For months, she had followed the same routine. Wake up, eat breakfast, get ready for work, and post a photo of her meal online. Later that day, Jared came home drunk. An argument started and ended abruptly. Around 5 p.m., Jared went to his parents' main house and calmly told them he had a problem. He asked them to come to the guest house where he lived with Angie. The moment they stepped inside, they were horrified. Angie's body lay on the living room floor. She had been decapitated. Blood covered the floors, walls, and even the ceiling. A blood-stained kitchen knife lay nearby, shaken but resolute. Jared's parents did not protect him. They immediately called 911. When police arrived at the guest house, they were stunned by the brutality. Even seasoned officers had never seen such a gruesome scene in their quiet town. Jared was present. He neither fled nor denied responsibility. He confessed to killing his wife, speaking with a disturbing lack of emotion. The police believed Jared was in a compromised state, possibly drunk, high, or experiencing mental health issues. Detectives reconstructed the timeline to understand what led to the tragedy, focusing on Jared's actions before he attacked his wife, Angie. Surveillance cameras showed Jared entering several stores around the city. In one, he walked in barefoot and bought a case of beer. The salesman later said he looked strange but not aggressive. Then he went home, where Angie was waiting. Jared claimed Angie was upset with him, and they argued again. He couldn't clearly remember how the violence began. He said her anger was tied to jealousy and job issues, and he believed he had seen an inappropriate text on her phone. However, a review of Angie's phone found no incriminating messages. She had been texting a co-worker about plans for later that day. Regardless, Jared, under the influence of alcohol and banned substance, became enraged. The situation escalated quickly. Jared grabbed a kitchen knife and attacked Angie. She suffered multiple stab and slash wounds. She showed little sign of defensive injuries, suggesting Jared may have attacked without warning. The medical examiner concluded that when the beheading began, Angie was likely already dead or unconscious from blood loss. The attempted dismemberment intensified the brutality of the crime. It wasn't to hide the body. It appeared intended to desecrate the victim. Forensic teams spent a long time collecting evidence throughout the blood-soaked guest house. They found Angie's head on the floor in a nearby room and gathered dozens of evidence, samples. Blood drops and splatters were everywhere. Examiners confirmed that a common kitchen knife was used for both the murder and the decapitation. Detectives were shocked by Jared's demeanor. He showed no remorse when speaking with police. Jared recounted the graphic details without hesitation or emotion. He even tried to minimize his responsibility, claiming Angie had insulted him, an argument untenable. Given the manner of her death, Angie's body was sent for autopsy, and her family in Nicaragua was notified. Tragically, her family could not afford to travel to the United States or repatriate her remains. The local community responded with compassion and organized a fundraiser. Residents were horrified by the cruelty of the crime and questioned whether it could have been prevented. Strikingly, the crime occurred just a short distance from Jared's parents' home, yet they did not intervene. Jared was taken into custody and cooperated with numerous interrogations. He confessed at the scene and later repeated his account in detail at the station. Even while describing the beheading of his 21-year-old wife, he remained calm, with a soft, even voice, treating the killing as if it were routine. He said Their relationship had always involved jealousy and control. He claimed there was no love. He believed she wanted legal stability in the country, and he wanted intimacy. When describing the murder, Jared said that in his rage he felt detached, as if someone else were committing the act, suggesting possible mental issues. Investigators, however, concluded the facts pointed to premeditated murder, not mental illness or intoxication. His actions were deliberate. Notably, before going to his parents to tell them Angie was dead, Jared showered, changed clothes, and then went to a store to buy more alcohol. After confessing, Jared was charged with first-degree murder and held on $500,000 bail. He couldn't afford it, and his parents refused to pay. He was admitted to a mental health monitoring unit due to concerns he might try to harm himself, and was placed under closer supervision. His attorney pursued an insanity defense from the start and requested psychiatric evaluations. While Jared awaited trial, multiple assessments of his mental state were conducted. Preliminary hearings were set for early 2024. Prosecutors argued Jared was competent to stand trial, while the defense sought independent evaluations. Throughout 2023, local residents who cared about Angie held vigils, joined by her colleagues and friends, all describing her as a bright, positive person who did not deserve such a fate. Her body was eventually returned to Nicaragua, where her family held the funeral. Meanwhile, Jared's family has cooperated with the police from the beginning. They were shocked by what he had done and were in regular contact with investigators. For a time, they were even considered possible participants in the abuse Angie suffered, but that suspicion was quickly dismissed. It became clear they had noticed warning signs, but did not recognize their seriousness. Hoping marriage would help their son, 4 months after the wedding, Angie was murdered. Neighbors provided valuable information, reporting frequent, heated arguments between the couple. Rumors circulated that the relationship was mutually abusive. A nearby neighbor said he heard their last major argument a few days before the killing. The relationship appeared very toxic. Community members spoke out about the tragedy, noting cultural differences between immigrants and native-born Americans, and warning that rushing into marriage can be an alarming sign. Still, the debate changed little. Despite Jared's confession, the motive for the murder and beheading remained unclear. Many believed substance abuse and untreated mental illness were major factors. This reignited discussions about early detection and intervention for such problems. Jared awaited trial in jail. Prosecutors said they would seek the maximum penalty under Texas law, including the death penalty. The defense leaned heavily on an insanity plea, suggesting Jared had an undiagnosed mental illness. He was described as emotionally unstable, with a long history of banned substance use and likely untreated mental health issues. Prosecutors argued the insanity defense would fail, pointing to Jared's calm demeanor and apparent awareness after the crime as signs of premeditation. They also revealed he had been arrested in November 2022 for drunk driving and released on bail. Citing public safety concerns, they asked to double his $500,000 bail. The judge agreed, and Jared remained in custody following the trial. 23 years old, Jared Dicus was sentenced to 40 years in prison. With eligibility for parole after 20 years, he will be eligible in 2043. Meanwhile, Angie's loved ones in Nicaragua continue to mourn her loss. Thanks to fundraising efforts, her family was able to bring her body home. Her mother gave a Spanish-language interview on a local television channel, tearfully describing Angie as responsible, bright, and devoted to her family. Angie worked tirelessly in the United States and regularly sent money back home. She had dreamed of becoming a nurse. Angie was especially worried about her aunt, who had cancer and lacked access to treatment. Helping her aunt was one of the reasons Angie traveled to the United States. Her story highlights how vulnerable immigration status can make someone. She faced language barriers, struggled to protect herself, and could not fully access support from law enforcement. Jared's actions also devastated his own family. His parents were accused of neglect and indifference, but they insisted they never imagined their son could commit what they call the most brutal crime in Waller County's history. Betrayal doesn't always come with raised voices or broken vows. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as love and care, a glass of water, a vitamin handed at bedtime, a calm voice saying, "Everything will be fine." For Hannah, that betrayal came from the one person she trusted most, her husband. As Hannah weakened day by day, Brian was more than her caretaker. He was the source of her suffering. Behind his polished image as a chiropractor and devoted father, he had set up a financial plan not for their future, but for the time after her death. He'd taken out multiple life insurance policies totaling over $1 million, all listing him as the sole beneficiary. What looked like devotion was, in truth, calculation. What seemed like protection was exploitation. And in the end, the man who vowed to cherish his wife in sickness and in health used her sickness as the path to his own fortune. This is the story of a marriage that became a contract of death, where love was poisoned for profit. Hannah lived in Decatur, Alabama, in a home organized entirely around her children's routines. Her days revolved around early wake-ups, daycare drop-offs, meals, naps, and evening activities. She manages the household and works part-time as a skincare specialist, sometimes seeing clients at home, sometimes at a guest house. She did not pursue a steady full-time career. Her husband, Brian Mann, was the family's financial breadwinner, allowing her to focus on housework and raising the children. They married in 2018. By the time of these events, Hannah was in her early 20s. Brian, her husband, was a local chiropractor who ran his own practice. Brian's clinic had a reputation for order and professionalism, friendly receptionists, spotless rooms, and strict scheduling. Patients praised his attentive consultations, personalized treatment plans, and reliable follow-up for chronic conditions. His strong reputation brought steady referrals, and the community trusted him. Brian's family lived simply but comfortably. Supported by the clinic's income, big expenses were planned in advance, but when it came to the children, they didn't hesitate to spend. Neighbors saw a neat house, a well-kept yard, weekend outings, all painted a picture of a perfect life. Successful husband, good wife, 2 young children, a peaceful lifestyle, but inside, things were more rigid than they seemed. Brian controlled many domestic decisions and gradually isolated Hannah from others. After the wedding, her meetups with friends dwindled. Appointments were often postponed or cancelled because of inconvenience, bad timing, or no one to look after the kids. She left social media and was eventually locked out of her accounts. Brian said it was for privacy and safety. He kept access to their shared email and passwords. He handled nearly all household administration, subscriptions, bills, appointments, while Hannah's days were consumed by home tasks. Mornings were for getting everyone else ready. Afternoons went to errands, cooking, and laundry. Evenings followed the children's schedules. She rarely visited the clinic, and only when necessary. Brian told others, and likely himself, that everything was under control. He cited his medical background at home too. Advice on sleep, vitamins, and nutrition. Appearing deeply involved in family life, that's how it looked. A well-ordered life, growing control within the household, and the slow erasure of Hannah's personal space. In mid-2021, a change came that seemed harmless at first. Leveraging his role as a health professional, Brian suggested Hannah start a daily vitamin regimen tailored to support her as a busy mother with little time to rest. He said the supplements came from his clinic, ensuring quality and safety. They were chewable gummies and powdered drinks. Trusting his advice, Hannah accepted it as a routine wellness step. Soon it was habit. Each evening, Brian brought the supplements to the bedroom with a glass of water. If she forgot, he gently reminded her, stressing consistency and promising benefits with regular use. His persistence looked like care. A few weeks later, Hannah began to notice slight changes in her body. Fatigue, dizziness. She attributed it to the workload of housework and childcare. Gradually, the symptoms became more severe. Back pain, frequent stomach pain. Her diet hadn't changed, yet she was losing weight. By the end of summer, her clothes hung loosely. Even though she hadn't tried to slim down, Brian stayed calm. As Hannah's symptoms emerged, he told her that her body was adjusting to improved nutrition, that any side effects were temporary, and that she would feel stronger within a few months. He spoke with absolute confidence, drawing on his medical background. Hannah wasn't alarmed. Her symptoms developed slowly, without any sudden crisis. Occasional good days made her think she might be recovering. Even as her energy declined and her weight continued to drop, it was this period that laid the foundation for a health condition that quickly became serious and dangerous. By late summer 2021, Hannah's condition had worsened significantly. Nausea set in, making it difficult to eat regularly. From September 2021 to January 2022, she lost nearly 40 pounds, dropping to about 84 pounds. Even doing daily housework left her breathless and exhausted. Standing in the kitchen for long was hard. She felt dizzy and had lower back pain. Stairs exhausted her. Eventually, she struggled to stay balanced and began using a rolling office chair to move around the house to reduce strain and avoid falls. Nighttime muscle cramps increased, and her sleep became shallow and restless. Despite Hannah's obvious decline in health, Brian discouraged her from seeking medical attention. He insisted he could manage her routine himself and framed her symptoms as the stress of parenting, seasonal fatigue, and lack of sleep, saying they didn't require professional attention. At the same time, Brian tightened control over the household. He decided when Hannah should rest, reminded her to take the supplements he provided, and personally brought her water to keep her on his schedule. He recommended at-home remedies, more rest, hydration, and light stretches, demonstrating them as safe and effective. He stayed soft-spoken and attentive, projecting care. By late fall, fatigue overshadowed everything else. Lifting her son and daughter became difficult. Hannah often asked them to wait while she sat to catch her breath. She had to spread out chores. Simple tasks took hours. By December, the contrast between how she looked and how she felt was clear. Her clothes hung loose and her face looked sunken. Yet her temperature was normal. Adding to the confusion, she knew she was getting worse but couldn't understand why. Her diet and workload hadn't changed. By early January 2022, Hannah was in crisis. Standing caused sudden weakness and brief vision blurring. Eating was a struggle. Food sometimes repulsed her, and a few bites could trigger nausea. Moving around without support became dangerous. She relied on the rolling chair to get from room to room. Still, Brian remained steadfast. He kept saying, "The worst is over," insisting she just needed more time to recover. He stayed calm, managed details, issued reminders, and spoke with unwavering confidence. When Hannah's condition became life-threatening, she did not seek help on her own. Her mother, visiting occasionally, recognized the danger and decided to act without telling Brian. Hannah could barely walk, so her mother helped her dress and guided her to the car. On the way to the hospital, Hannah said little, mostly describing abdominal pain and extreme weakness. At the University of Alabama Hospital emergency room, her mother immediately told staff that her condition had been deteriorating for months without medical care. Doctors began by checking the basics: weight, blood pressure, temperature, and heart rate. The results were alarming. Hannah's weight was dangerously low. Her pulse was weak, and her blood pressure was unstable. Physicians initially considered a broad range of causes, from chronic conditions to serious systemic illnesses, and ordered extensive lab tests and diagnostic procedures. Blood work revealed a critical finding. Hannah's blood lead level was about 80 micrograms per deciliter. For comparison, anything above 10 is medically concerning. Her level posed an immediate, life-threatening risk. Additional tests showed signs of internal organ distress, and she soon developed acute respiratory failure. Doctors placed her on a ventilator to support her breathing. Imaging scans revealed fine, metallic-like particles throughout her tissues. Lead deposits accumulated over time from ongoing exposure rather than a single event. This chronic exposure explained her gradual symptoms and the sudden crisis. Once her condition became critical, her health declined so quickly that doctors induced a medical coma to reduce physiological stress and prevent permanent damage. Treatment began immediately with chelation therapy to bind and remove the lead. Progress was slow and required continuous monitoring. Hannah remained hospitalized for nearly 2 months. During that time, the team stabilized her breathing, improved her vital signs, and lowered her blood lead levels. Still, the damage from prolonged exposure was evident, and full recovery was unlikely. Doctors emphasized that even a 1-day delay might have been fatal. Hannah's survival ultimately hinged on her mother's decision to act, breaking from the family's usual pattern and enabling a timely diagnosis and urgent treatment. Once the diagnosis was confirmed, the hospital notified the Morgan County Department of Human Resources, which then alerted state investigators in Alabama. Specialists in toxic metal exposure took the case. Their first step was to test Hannah's family home for environmental sources of lead. They began in the kitchen and bathrooms, collecting water samples from every faucet and removing filters for analysis. They documented the condition of the plumbing and dishware used for food and drinks. Investigators also collected paint chips from older surfaces, dust samples, and soil from outside. They reviewed pantry items, including foods and nutritional products given to the children. Brian cooperated, pointing out the vitamin supplements Hannah had been taking from his clinic. He also suggested fast food as a possible source of exposure. Investigators documented his comments, but quickly ruled out that theory. With a blood lead level near 80 micrograms per deciliter, other cases would likely have appeared, yet no similar local incidents were reported. Furthermore, Brian and their other children showed no signs of lead exposure, undermining the idea of common environmental source. Initial lab tests of the home's water, paint, dust, pantry items, and nutritional products showed no hazardous lead levels or notable abnormalities. At this point, investigators had found no typical household source of contamination. They recommended testing for all household members. Brian reported that his son and daughter's results were normal and said he would complete his own testing later at a separate facility. His delay raised concerns, especially since some tests could have been done immediately on site. This was flagged for follow-up. A second home inspection occurred a few days later, with experts from the Alabama Department of Public Health expanding the scope of testing. They collected water from initial flow and post-flush samples, gathered dust from multiple surfaces, inspected filters, and took swabs from the kitchen's sink, kettle, and blender to check for metal leaching. Investigators also requested packaging from the vitamins and powder mixes to identify the manufacturer and batch numbers. The second round of results reinforced the initial findings. There was no source of lead in the home environment. However, the source and composition of Hannah's supplements remained unclear because the investigators did not have access to actual samples. They began to reconstruct Hannah's daily routine by talking to her family and close contacts. They focused on who prepared the meals, and especially the timing, location, frequency, and context in which Hannah took the supplements. The family reported that Brian regularly reminded Hannah to take them in the evening. At home, with a glass of water, he left by her bed. These details supported a working theory of intentional oral exposure. The initial stages of the investigation revealed three main findings. There was no evidence of lead contamination in the home environment. The hypothesis of exposure through eating at restaurants was not supported by any definitive data. Further consideration of factors related to dietary supplement use, particularly Brian's direct role, warranted further scrutiny. As a result, investigators shifted their attention to Brian, verifying his statements and checking whether he had access to lead outside the home. After Hannah was hospitalized, Brian arrived at the hospital, claiming he had performed a self-exam. He said he used X-ray equipment at his own clinic and believed he saw a foreign substance in his body that could be lead. This claim puzzled the medical team. Self-diagnosing with X-rays is highly unorthodox, and using clinic equipment for personal testing is not standard practice. Physicians insisted he undergo a full, independent evaluation. When Brian realized the hospital would conduct the tests, he became visibly anxious. Screening confirmed the presence of lead in his system, but only at a low level, consistent with very recent exposure, too low to cause symptoms and not indicative of long-term accumulation. This is in stark contrast to Hannah's results, which showed clear evidence of prolonged exposure at high levels over several months. Experts concluded that Brian had likely ingested lead shortly before coming to the hospital to present himself as a fellow victim. This may have been an attempt to appear proactive and concerned, but the exposure timeline did not match and undermined his story. Interviews with colleagues and acquaintances further showed that Brian exhibited no symptoms of chronic lead exposure throughout Hannah's illness. His behavior and physical condition remained normal. To investigators, this strongly suggested Hannah's poisoning was not accidental. The pattern pointed to deliberate poisoning with no apparent risk to other family members. Brian's attempt to cast himself as a victim only deepened suspicion. Authorities believed he was trying to divert attention from the central issue, how lead had been entering Hannah's body over an extended period. In summer 2022, a contractor who had worked for Brian the previous year contacted investigators. He reported that in 2021, he had installed an X-ray room at Brian's clinic, lining the walls with lead sheets. After completion, leftover lead sheets and scraps remained. According to the contractor, Brian asked that the unused pieces be left behind, saying he would handle them. At the time, this seemed routine. Brian owned the clinic and had paid for the materials, but after learning of Hannah's diagnosis, the contractor reconsidered. He gave an official statement to police. Investigators compared his account with Hannah's medical timeline and found a match. Her symptoms worsened markedly in August 2021. Shortly after the clinic renovation was completed, the dates aligned. Brian gained access to lead just before Hannah's prolonged illness began. This gave investigators a documented external source of the toxic metal, separate from the family's home. The contractor on the clinic project provided a detailed timeline from start to final cleanup. He explained standard procedures. Leftover materials are either returned to the warehouse or disposed of safely. He did not see what Brian did with the remaining lead. He simply handed it to him at the clinic owner's request. Investigators obtained the service agreement, start and completion dates, and a full materials list, confirming both the timing and presence of lead-based shielding, clinic staff reported that only Brian had keys to the X-ray room and that the post-installation cleanup occurred without the contractor. This timeline became central. In 2021, Brian had access to a real source of lead. While the contractor's statement did not explain how the lead was administered, it established where it came from and supported the theory of intentional exposure. As the investigation progressed, another key detail emerged. Hannah had multiple life insurance policies totaling about $3 million. All policies named Brian as policyholder and sole beneficiary. Because they were spread across several insurers, they were harder to detect and obscured the overall coverage. The first policy was taken out in 2020, and Hannah likely knew about it. In 2021, around the time her health declined, additional policies were added, attempts to increase coverage by another one. $5 million were denied when applications were rejected. The timing of these expansions, coinciding with Hannah's worsening condition, strengthened the case for intent. The health questionnaires required for approval were especially important. They demanded proof of good health, and significant weight loss could trigger denial. According to Hannah, Brian pressured her to wear weighted ankle bands during weigh-ins to conceal her weight loss and make her appear stable, benefiting the applications. During medical consultations, Brian seemed more focused on policy limits and conditions than on diagnosis or treatment. Staff noted he repeatedly raised insurance technicalities as a priority. Hannah's insurance forms carried electronic signatures, which later became disputed. The defense claimed Hannah was aware and involved. She denied this, saying Brian had access to some of her digital accounts. Investigators focused less on the specific content of the forms and more on the broader questions: who initiated the applications, who stood to benefit, and how medical documentation was tailored to fit policy requirements. A review of the family's coverage revealed a red flag. Brian, the primary earner, had a relatively modest policy, while Hannah, who contributed less financially, was insured for far larger amounts. Typically, higher earners carry higher coverage. This discrepancy suggested potential financial misconduct and pointed to a clear motive. Hannah's death would have yielded substantial payouts to Brian. By trial, both sides had firm positions. The prosecution argued that Brian deliberately poisoned Hannah with lead to collect insurance benefits, supported by medical data, a detailed timeline, and extensive financial records. The defense tried to undermine the evidence, citing procedural issues. They emphasized that there was no direct proof of how the lead entered Hannah's system and urged the court to reject circumstantial evidence without definitive proof of the method of poisoning. Court proceedings began in June 2025 on an expedited schedule. The defense concentrated on the collection and storage of biological samples, noting that urine was sometimes collected in non-standard containers and handled outside proper laboratory conditions. They also emphasized two gaps: the incomplete chemical comparison between the lead found in Brian's clinic and the lead detected in Hannah's body, and the absence of the original supplement containers. The defense proposed alternative explanations, including accidental exposure. After hearing both sides, the court ruled the medical and procedural evidence admissible. It acknowledged procedural flaws that could affect how jurors weighed the evidence, but found they did not make it invalid. When witness testimony ended, the defense called no witnesses, arguing the prosecution bore the burden of proof. In closing, the prosecution presented a timeline. Brian obtained access to lead in 2021. Hannah's health declined soon after. No lead sources were found in the home. The theory of shared environmental exposure was weakened because no other household members showed contamination. The prosecution cited financial motive, insurance policies, and attempts to increase coverage, and medical analysis that refuted Brian's claim that he himself had been poisoned, the defense maintained that the evidence was circumstantial and lacked direct proof of how lead entered Hannah's system. After several hours of deliberation, the jury found Brian Mann guilty of attempted murder. The court ordered Brian held without bail, pending sentencing, and scheduled a trial for early August 2025. The judge outlined potential penalties, including life in prison, depending on the extent of harm to Hannah and the level of planning. At the August hearing, with Brian Mann already convicted of attempted murder using toxic substances, the prosecution sought the maximum sentence. They argued his actions were not a brief lapse, but a calculated, multi-stage effort over several months. During this period, he hid Hannah's worsening condition from medical providers, delayed her diagnosis, and promoted a false narrative of a shared household source. The defense asked the court to avoid a life sentence, citing Brian's clean record, community standing, medical career, prior support for his family, Hannah's survival and ongoing treatment, and lingering uncertainty about his intent. In explaining its decision, the court found that the full body of evidence, medical records, financial documents, witness testimony, and investigative findings showed the deliberate conduct. The judge described the crimes as prolonged, causing irreparable harm, with lifelong consequences for Hannah. Brian Mann was sentenced to 25 years in state prison, with no parole eligibility for the first 20 years. The court also ordered restitution for Hannah's medical costs and emotional damages, with the amount to be set in a separate civil proceeding. The sentence did not restore Hannah's former life. Although her condition stabilized, the effects of severe lead poisoning were irreversible. Doctors reported lasting neurological impairments, chronic pain, persistent fatigue, and a need for lifelong blood monitoring. Some motor function returned, but she still required a wheelchair for long distances. Hannah's son and daughter were placed in the care of her relatives. The case drew a strong public response. Former patients of Brian's clinic were shocked and confused by the verdict. Shortly after his arrest, the clinic was closed. Authorities seized all medical equipment, including the X-ray machine, for forensic analysis. Brian's medical license was revoked, and the building was later put up for sale. Insurance companies tied to the case launched internal audits of policies associated with Brian. They introduced new risk assessment measures, such as stricter verification of medical information for high-value policies. For law enforcement, the case set a precedent. Toxicological evidence can establish intent even without recovering the substance's delivery method. Investigators emphasized that indirect evidence, backed by expert analysis and consistent witness testimony, was pivotal in securing the conviction. Hannah publicly thanked the medical team, investigators, and witnesses, saying their efforts likely saved her life. She did not discuss future plans, focusing instead on healing and caring for her son and daughter. On a quiet morning in late August 2024, the coastal city of Praia Grande awoke to a crime so brutal that it shocked the entire country. Neighbors heard yelling and crashing sounds, followed by silence. When police entered the apartment, they found chaos. Blood on the floor, broken glass scattered across the rooms. The victim was Igor Pareto, a young and widely admired businessman. He was found dead in his sister's apartment, his body bearing dozens of stab wounds. But what truly shocked was not just the brutality of the act, but the identity of the suspects, the very people Igor trusted the most. How could love, loyalty, and family ties turn to betrayal and murder? And what hidden motives lie beneath this web of passion, jealousy, and ambition? Igor Pareto was born on May 17, 1997, in the state of São Paulo, southeastern Brazil. From the very beginning, his life unfolded Within a large and complex family, his father had relationships with different partners over the years, which gave Igor many siblings. Growing up in this unconventional environment shaped his personality, giving him resilience and a sharp awareness of the world around him. Among all these family ties, one bond stood out: the close connection he shared with his younger sister, Marceli Pareto. As a boy, Igor was both determined and restless. He was ambitious, eager to take on challenges, so business quickly became his calling. With a natural ability to recognize opportunities, he never hesitated to take risks to build something of his own. These qualities earned him respect in his community and gradually established him as a rising figure in the business circles of Praia Grande, a coastal city. While his professional life advanced with momentum, his personal life was not always as stable. He had a distant relationship with a child from a previous romance that ended without lasting commitment. Then, toward the end of 2018, everything seemed to change when he met a young woman who embodied everything he had ever dreamed of: Rafaela Costa, a year younger than him. To Igor, she was striking not only for her beauty, but also for her determination, a trait he found magnetic. Rafaela also longed to start a family, and this shared desire created an immediate deep bond between them. Their relationship moved quickly. In June 2019, they welcomed their first child together, a moment that marked a turning point for Igor. Family became his anchor, the foundation of his values, and the source of his deepest pride. He didn't keep this love hidden. On social media, he openly expressed admiration for Rafaela and affection for his children, making it clear to everyone how much they meant to him. By 2022, at just 25 years old, Igor had already launched his first business, a car dealership. As the company grew, so did his ambitions. Soon after, he established a marketing firm and later expanded his automotive ventures by opening a second branch dedicated exclusively to motorcycles. This new project was built in partnership with Mario Vitorino da Silva, his brother-in-law and best friend. Mario, who was married to Marceli, shared with Igor not only the long days of hard work, but also leisure time, family moments, and a sense of loyalty that seemed unshakable. Igor was usually selective in his relationships, cautious about who he allowed into his inner circle. With Mario, however, he let his guard down. Their friendship deepened quickly, marked by trust and brotherhood. A similar closeness developed between Rafaela and Marceli. More than sisters-in-law, they became true friends, supporting one another, building a connection grounded in honesty and complicity. In time, Igor decided to take the next step with Rafaela. He proposed, she accepted, and for a moment, their lives seemed perfectly aligned. But the wedding never came. Instead, their relationship began to weaken. Rafaela then described how alcohol became a destructive agent in Igor's behavior. Under its influence, he grew jealous, controlling, and verbally aggressive. Although he never physically assaulted her, there was one night at a bar when his temper escalated into a fight that resulted in criminal charges. The case left a mark on his record, though it had no lasting legal consequences. As the years went by, challenges continued to test Igor and Mario. Both men became targets of an investigation for alleged money laundering. Though they were eventually acquitted, the case fueled gossip and suspicion in their community, leaving an uncomfortable cloud over their reputations. On July 24, 2024, Rafaela made a painful choice. She decided to separate from Igor. At first, he resisted the idea, unwilling to let go, but eventually he respected her decision and moved temporarily into another apartment he owned. During this time apart, Igor devoted himself to change. Convinced that he could win Rafaela back if he transformed himself, he began adopting healthier habits, lost weight, most importantly, gave up alcohol and other substances that had once fueled his temper. For nearly a month, he worked not only to rebuild his body, but also to regain his self-control. His efforts seemed to pay off. By the end of August, Rafaela agreed to give their relationship another chance, and Igor returned home. For a brief moment, it looked as though life was back on track, but the peace didn't last. The reconciliation collapsed almost as quickly as it had begun. Just weeks after moving back in, Igor and Rafaela separated once more. It was in this fragile context that the fateful night of Friday, the 30th of August, 2024, unfolded. That afternoon, Igor dropped off his children at his mother's house, promising to return later to spend the night. Free of responsibilities, he joined his brother-in-law Mario at a party hosted by one of his brothers. It was an annual tradition, made even livelier that year by the celebration of their favorite football team's victory for both Igor and Mario. It was also a welcome distraction from their fractured personal lives. Igor wasn't the only one suffering. Mario, too, had been separated from Marceli for months. Though their divorce wasn't finalized, that same evening, in another part of the city, Rafaela and Marceli went out together. After dinner and drinks at a restaurant, they decided to head to the very same party. Despite knowing that their partners would be there, their intention was simply to see friends and enjoy the night. Inside, the atmosphere grew tense. The women stayed on one side, the men on the other. Words weren't exchanged, but glances occasionally crossed the room, thick with unspoken emotion. As dawn approached, Rafaela and Marceli left together. They got into Rafaela's car. She drove her friend back to the apartment where Marceli was staying. Moments later, Igor and Mario also left the party. Igor tried to request a ride through a taxi app, but Mario insisted on giving him a lift. That decision would change everything. At daybreak on Saturday, August 31, 2024, the quiet of a Praia Grande neighborhood was shattered. Disturbances were reported from an apartment building. The manager, alarmed by loud noises, rang the bell several times. When no one answered, she called the police. Officers arrived swiftly, but their knocks also went unanswered. With the help of a locksmith, they forced the door open. Inside, the scene was chilling. Bloodstains stretched across the kitchen, living room, and dining area. Leading deeper into the apartment, furniture was overturned. Following the trail, officers reached a bedroom where the horror was complete. On the floor lay the body of a young man. It was Igor, just 27 years old. A toppled wardrobe with mirrored doors lay across him, its glass shattered into razor-sharp fragments scattered around the room. In the bathroom, investigators found a bloodied kitchen knife taken from a drawer. The apartment belonged to Marceli, and the victim was her brother. No other person was found inside, but the crime scene itself spoke volumes. The level of violence was extreme, suggesting from the very beginning that this case would become one of the most publicized in Brazil. And in the days that followed, the details that emerged only deepened the shock. Forensic experts confirmed that Igor was killed right where his body was found. He had suffered multiple blunt force injuries and at least 40 stab wounds, concentrated on his torso, head, and back. The bloodied kitchen knife, recovered from the bathroom, was identified as the murder weapon. As the brutality of the crime dominated headlines nationwide, investigators turned to the building's security cameras. The footage allowed them to reconstruct the final hours with chilling precision. At 4:32 a.m., Marceli and Rafaela arrived together by car, parked near the entrance, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Just over an hour later, Rafaela was seen again, this time alone. She entered the elevator and left the building. Only 13 seconds after her departure, another car arrived. At 5:44 a.m., cameras captured Igor and Mario entering the elevator. Igor, phone in hand, appeared to be arguing heatedly with his brother-in-law. 20 minutes later, Mario and Marcelli were recorded leaving the apartment. Instead of taking the elevator, they chose the stairs. Minutes after that, garage cameras showed them crossing the parking lot and exiting through the main door. Witness accounts reinforced this timeline. Several neighbors reported hearing shouting from the apartment, rage-filled voices that carried through the walls. They said one man screamed about betrayal, insisting that the people closest to him had conspired behind his back. He cried out that he loved a woman desperately, yet she had deceived him. These testimonies steered investigators toward their first working theory, a crime of passion, born of jealousy and betrayal within the family. With mounting evidence, police identified three main suspects: Marcelli, 20 years old, Mario, 23, and Raffaella, 26. A judge swiftly issued arrest warrants, ordering that the trio be held for 30 days. But when officers moved in, the suspects had vanished. As the search intensified, investigators uncovered another crucial detail. While Igor and Mario were driving earlier that night, Mario had received a phone call. His phone was connected to the car's multimedia system, and the caller's name, Raffaella, flashed across the dashboard. Igor was stunned. At first, he fell silent, then exploded with rage. The festive atmosphere of the evening evaporated instantly. Igor flooded Raffaella with calls and messages, demanding answers. But she never replied. Checking their location-sharing app, he discovered she was at Marcelli's apartment. Furious, Igor ordered Mario to take him there. Warned by Mario and by Igor's barrage of messages, Raffaella slipped out just minutes before the men arrived. Igor's sudden death left the Pareto family reeling, grief mixed with scandal. Ultimately, custody went to Igor's mother. Then, on September 6, less than a week after the murder, Marcelli and Raffaella voluntarily surrendered to the civil police. Around the same time, Mario's abandoned car was located near a post office. Inside, investigators found suspected bloodstains on the gear shift and seat, along with a bottle. The vehicle was seized and sent to the Directorate of Criminalistics for forensic testing. Days later, an anonymous tip from one of Igor's brothers led police to Mario. He was discovered hiding in a house less than 200 meters from Praia Grande, at the home of relatives connected to Raffaella's family. His short time on the run ended immediately. With all three suspects in custody, interrogations began and contradictions surfaced at once. Each gave a different version of events, yet all agreed on one shocking detail: Raffaella and Mario were secretly involved. Marcelli claimed she only learned of the affair that night. Raffaella went further, admitting that in the early hours of that morning, she and Marcelli had also shared an intimate encounter, though she insisted it was the first and only time. Through her lawyer, Marcelli stated that when Igor and Mario arrived at the apartment, she was alone, half-dressed, under the influence of alcohol and other substances. She admitted hearing them argue, but assumed it was another of their frequent disputes and chose not to intervene. According to her version, while she was in the dressing room, getting dressed, Igor kicked a mirror, shattering it in a fit of rage. When she went out, she found he was seriously injured. Mario presented a different account. He alleged that Igor attacked him with shards of glass from the broken mirror. Photographs of superficial injuries were submitted in support of this claim, but investigators noted that they had been taken more than 2 weeks after the killing, casting serious doubt on their credibility. Raffaella, meanwhile, denied any direct role in the attack. She explained that Igor had often threatened to kill her if she ever betrayed him, and so she fled the apartment out of fear for her life. While driving to her mother's house, she got a message from Mario. He said he had to drug Igor to keep him calm and warned her to not come near. According to her testimony, it was not until the following morning, at a gas station meeting with Mario and Marcelli, that she learned Igor was dead. In shock, but unable to process the situation, she nevertheless stayed with them as they tried to cover their tracks. At one point, she said, she left Marcelli with family members while she accompanied Mario to buy clean clothes because his were blood-stained. The two then checked into a hotel, where Mario showered and changed. Soon afterward, Raffaella abandoned him and returned to the city. Detectives, however, reconstructed a very different scenario. Their working hypothesis was that Mario and Raffaella had conspired in advance. Screenshots of text messages exchanged hours before the murder revealed discussions about spending the night together, celebrating their football team's championship victory. For prosecutors, the motive was clear. Igor stood in the way of their affair, and his death promised financial gain. Mario would assume sole control of the motorcycle dealership, while Raffaella, mother of Igor's son, would obtain inheritance rights. As Mario's wife, Marcelli would also benefit indirectly. On these grounds, all three were formally charged with aggravated homicide, based on vile motives, préméditation. Investigators stressed the brutality of the betrayal. Igor had been killed not by strangers, but by people he trusted most. In response, the suspects began adjusting their narratives. Raffaella denied helping Mario hide, despite the fact that he was captured at a property belonging to her relatives. Marcelli insisted she had seen nothing because of intoxication and claimed Mario entered the apartment on his own, using a code he already knew. Collectively, they attempted to portray Igor as unstable, violent, and threatening. Prosecutors, however, rejected these defenses. They highlighted that the shattered wardrobe had collapsed on top of Igor, suggesting he had been pushed rather than having caused the damage himself. They also noted that if Mario had truly acted in self-defense, the number of stab wounds would not have reached dozens, and at least one of the three would have sought medical assistance instead of fleeing. Later, Marcelli's defense requested a second autopsy, though without explaining what new findings it might produce. The move angered members of Igor's family, who accused her of deliberately delaying proceedings and prolonging their suffering. By this point, one fact was undeniable. The case had become one of Brazil's most complex and emotionally charged criminal proceedings, marked by betrayal, hidden relationships, and financial motives. The courts determined that Raffaella, Marcelli, and Mario would remain in preventive detention without a fixed release date while awaiting trial. Throughout 2025, multiple hearings were held. New witnesses came forward. The civil police delegate, who led the early investigation, testified, and further evidence was presented. The court announced that the case would likely proceed before a jury. By early July, after the evidentiary phase was completed, the tribunal denied all defense requests for release. The judge emphasized the exceptional brutality of the crime, the manipulation of evidence, and the defendant's attempts to flee as decisive reasons for keeping them in custody. As of today, the case remains pending. Brazilian society continues to follow every development closely, waiting to see whether the justice system will deliver a fair and transparent verdict, or whether the web of contradictions, betrayals, and alleged manipulation will obscure the truth.